Hi everyone, good morning. Thanks for attending. Thanks a lot for organizing this workshop. It's a great pleasure to be back in Korea, in Seoul. So my name is Arthur Charpentier. I'm professor at University of Quebec in Montreal, and currently I'm visiting Kyoto University for a year. And I will give a talk about what I call granularity, mutualization, and AI risk in insurance, which is very long. Just to say that I'm going to talk about insurability. And my point is that when you look at the dominant narrative, when we hear about AI and insurance, it's usually very optimistic. The more data we have, the better the models, the better the pricing, the better insurance. But I think we need to step back a little and look at it and see that actually there's a lot of questions raised about insurability in this context of AI. So I will try to talk about two things. What I have in mind is to have two angles based on recent work I've been doing. The first one is about granularity and mutualization, which is a question I've been working on for the past 10 years, which is about the fact that having more and more information is not always a good thing. And insurance is based on the fact that there's a veil of ignorance, and we need insurance to cover for those possible losses. And the more data we have, the more difficult it might be to offer insurance for some people. And the second step will be about AI as a risk. The fact that sometime in many insurance contracts, people are using AI for a lot of things, and this will give us a lot of risks. I wouldn't say new risks, because I think in a lot of contexts, risks are already there, but there will be more concentration, more opacity, and it will be extremely challenging for insurance companies to cover for those possible losses, right? So I wanted to take those two angles and to talk about that during this talk this morning. So first I will start with, there will be only one slide with equations. So I wanted to get back on something that we all know as actuaries, is the fact that there's a variance decomposition. So variance is just the variability of possible profit and loss. And in actuarial models, we always assume that there's a latent risk. Okay, we have heterogeneity in portfolios. Everyone is not equal facing risk. There's a latent risk factor, theta, that we do not observe. Okay, this is going to give us within and between variances, but we cannot observe it. And it's something that we should acknowledge. We will never observe the latent risk, but we can collect information. We can get data. Just think of motor insurance. You cannot observe the latent risk of everyone, but you can observe the color of the car, the address of the driver, the gender of the driver, and a lot of covariates that could help us to create segments, to create classes of risks, right? But it's not going to capture everything. Okay, there will still be something remaining. So if you get back on the variance decomposition, there's always this irreducible risk. The fact that there's always, at some point, the idea of flipping a coin. Okay, even if I know everything about you, at the end of the day, I will never know who's going to claim a loss by the end of the year. Okay, there's always a part of randomness. People are always flipping a coin. The thing is, the probability to get a tail is different for everyone. Okay, what we want to assess as actuaries is not who's going to claim a loss. Okay, that's not the goal of actuarial science. The goal of actuarial science is to get a fair and accurate estimate of the probability to claim a loss. Okay, everything is about assessing risks. It's not about trying to identify people who are going to die, or people who are going to get surgery, or people who are going to get a car accident. Okay, so there's always some part of randomness that we cannot get rid of. I mean, the day we will be able to get rid of this kind of uncertainty, there's no more insurance, right? We have a residual part, which is the classically the epistemic uncertainty, and this is where we have this big data coming in. The thing is, the more data you can collect, the smaller this variance will be, right? So this is what everyone in the insurance industry is trying to collect a lot of information about people, just to reduce this uncertainty. And as we will see, it can become extremely problematic when you can get very, very small classes of risk. And in that case, there's a lot of chance that people will not buy insurance because it will be way too expensive. Okay? So we still need to be in between this solidarity and individualization of risk. That's more or less what's underlying these mathematical formulas. This question of information is not new, obviously. There's a lot of discussion in economics of insurance, about information. The thing is, when you get back to all those papers that started a long time ago with Akerlof, with Rothschild and Stiglitz in the 70s, it's usually about asymmetric information. The fact that policyholders and insurance companies don't have the same information. Usually, policyholders have more information than insurance company. Okay, just think of all those papers we got 20 years or 30 years ago about genetic testing, when people could test for their genes and get more information that they will not share with the insurance company. So people in the 70s and afterwards were struggling about the idea of the future of insurance when you have such asymmetric information. That's not what I'm going to talk about today. What I want to talk about today is not asymmetric information, is more granularity. The fact that insurance companies have now more and more detailed information about people. Okay? Just think in terms of telematics, genetic data, behavioral traces, a lot of information that they can collect about policyholders. And I will get back about climate because there's a session about climate, and I think climate is a very, very important topic. In a lot of cases about climate, we have more and more information about policyholders, right? When you start using very granular data, you can say a lot of things, and you can distort mutualization that we need to provide insurance covers, right? So having more and more detail is usually, might not be a good thing. One of the issues I've been working on for the past years is about fairness and discrimination, okay? In some cases, you can assess a lot of features about people that you're not supposed to collect, okay? In many countries, you're not supposed to price based on genders, based on race, based on private information that is supposed to be sensitive. And now we have a lot of documentation about the fact that removing a sensitive variable is never a sufficient solution because of all the proxies you can get by collecting additional information. So granularity is this idea that you collect a lot of information that can give you a lot of insight about the policyholders, sometimes information you don't want to use because in many countries it's not allowed to use such information because you can predict sensitive attributes, but also the fact that actually you can predict with more and more accuracy the underlying risks of people, right? So this granularity is really an issue. Recently, we've been working on the case of natural catastrophes. In the case of France, so France has a very unique system to deal with natural catastrophes, highly based on solidarity. Okay, it's a country where insurance is compulsory. The price is not exactly set by insurance company, but by government. Okay, so you pay your household insurance, and then you're going to have on top of your household insurance 20% of the premium dedicated to covering all kinds of natural catastrophes in France. There is an implied solidarity among everyone in France, right? But now we have some issues because we have maps, and actually official maps. Those are coming from the Ministry of Ecology. They provide extremely detailed maps about subsidence. So subsidence is a risk that is compulsory in France, which is the fact that you have shrinkage and possible problem with houses when they are built on clay because it's going to absorb and release the water. So it's going to make the houses less robust. And in that case, it's very easy to identify who's going to be at risk and who's not going to be at risk. And also about flood insurance. And you can see that the maps are extremely detailed. Okay, so it's more than per street. Okay, it's per blocks or stuff like that. You know exactly who's going to claim a loss or who might be claiming a loss in the future. So in that case, when you start using those maps, you can identify people with exactly zero chance to claim a loss and people with a very high risk to claim a loss. And the kind of solidarity we have is actually collapsing because the premium asked to people living in risky areas is amazingly high. Right, and there's a lot of discussion in France about how to change the system because it's not going to work. Okay, right now they cannot do anything because it's compulsory. Okay, so they cannot change the premium to be risk-based. But what we see is actually insurance companies don't offer any contracts in some areas. So we got insurance company withdrawing from risky areas, which is not what the system was designed for. The idea of the system was to provide fair premiums to everyone. But when you cannot buy insurance because there's no insurance company proposing covers in your area, then we have a problem. And this is a problem we cannot face as actuaries, because when you look at it, most actuaries are working for companies. They look at their portfolio, and when you look at the portfolio, you just see, oh, I don't have anyone in this area. You don't know why. There's a lot of selection bias in insurance, but usually actuaries don't look at it. They don't know exactly why they got these people in their portfolio and what happened to the other people. And usually you don't care. You just say they're going to go somewhere else. But what if there's no somewhere else? What if people cannot purchase insurance, which is what we observe more and more today, right? So it's really about this question of using information. It's very related to the question of actuarial fairness. Actuarial fairness has to do with the fact that you want to have premium that reflect the risks. Okay, if you got the same risk, you should get the same premium. But equal risk is something that is very weird because we don't know exactly what it means. It depends clearly on the information you have, but there can be very different kinds of information. For instance, do we include or not sensitive attributes? Do we take into account those extremely detailed maps where we know exactly who's going to be hit at some point by flood events and who might not? Okay, so we have more and more information, and we need to use that. So there's a real tension between three concepts of fairness that we have in insurance, which is this opposition between actuarial adequacy, which is the fact that we want to get premium based on risks, right? So it's actuarial fairness, the classical notion of actuarial fairness. Then we have solidarity, where we accept that we will have cross subsidies between people, maybe handicapped people and non-handicapped people, okay, people with different sensitive attributes. And then there's one we started to discuss more and more with, especially with Olivier Coté, our PhD student, working on causal legitimacy in the context of premium. We want to have explanatory variables that have a causal effect on the outcome. Because if you have this causal link, possibly you can use that for prevention, okay? But clearly we have a problem with those maps because those risk maps we have in climate risk are, in a way, causal, okay? They explain something that has a causal link with possible claims, right? So we even have a problem with causal legitimacy when we have climate risk. So it's really a big challenge, and I think we should spend a lot of time on those questions because otherwise there will be a big problem in the market. People will not trust any more insurance company, and insurance is based on trust. Everything about insurance is trust. Okay, insurance is the fact that some people might have some future losses. Insurance is the contribution of the many to the misfortune of the few. We collect premiums, and then at some point we're going to pay back. If people don't trust the system, then they're not going to buy insurance. So trust is a key issue in insurance, and we need to have techniques that could give back this trust in insurance. And then the second part was about AI risks. Okay, so obviously we know that AI is a very interesting tool used by insurance company based on the idea that we're going to collect more data that should be based on risk, but also machine learning was going to give us better models that are going to help us to get better estimates of the underlying risk, right? But I think in many lines of business, it will bring a lot of additional losses because not only insurance companies are going to use AI, but also policyholders. So in many contexts, policyholders will be using AI for different things. Okay, just think about a company like a hospital who's going to use techniques to make triage. Okay, so they're going to get some sort of LLM, some chatbot asking question. What happens if we have a problem in triage and we have people that were supposed to be going to surgery and we don't get surgery, not because a doctor said so, because in that case hospitals will be liable for that. But what if it's a chatbot? Who's going to be liable for that? Okay, so we have a lot of cases where actually, so it's not really a new risk, it's not a new line of business, it's just the fact that in many insurance lines, there might be some possible AI-related loss because there will be AI-based techniques used to do things. And I don't even mention the case of critical systems, okay? What if we got crashes of planes because of a problem in the design of softwares? And I will talk about that later on, but in the context of vibe coding, which is what we have more and more, the fact that people don't code anymore, you just write a prompt and ask an LLM to write a code. What happens if we start to get crashes of planes or problem of nuclear plants? Okay, in critical systems, we still need to have software computers computer guys working on those codes and not machines. We need to understand exactly what happened. So it's really about the fact that in many already risky contracts, there might be additional risk coming from AI. So I don't think it's a new risk. I think it's really more a combination of something which is kind of new, but also relate to things we know as actuaries and we've been working on for the past 20 years. It's the fact that we have a lot of correlation, okay? Because a lot of companies are going to use the same API, the same data, the same languages and so on. So there's a lot of correlation. There's a lot of opacity, okay? We have more and more codes that no one has been reviewing, okay? The scale, because it's coming extremely fast. 5 years ago, only a small part of the code was AI-based by generative AI. Now I think a lot of, not to say the majority of the code produced is generated by AI, right? So we have a lot of opacity coming extremely fast, a lot of updates that no one really controls, and it's very difficult to have what I call ex-post attribution. When you have a claim, you want to understand why, okay? And the thing is, nowadays, it's really complicated to understand why we got a claim. And since we have this increase of the speed, looking back at what happened will take some time. And that during that time, when you want to investigate and understand why we got a problem, there might be also additional claims coming in, right? So it's really about dealing with the speed of AI that could bring us new risks that we have to deal with. So a lot of accumulation, okay? A lot of things about the fact that there's a shared technological infrastructure. When you look at it, AI is really something that you have in maybe 5-6 companies in the world. So they control a lot of things. So it's becoming extremely synchronized. When you start to have a problem, you have a lot of problems everywhere. There might be a little something that might help us. It's when you think about generative AI, it's the fact that there's already a little bit of a randomness, which makes it extremely difficult to replicate. But I think it might be a good thing because it's going to bring us some little randomness. So some company will have problem using one prompt and other companies won't have the same problem with exactly the same prompt, just because of the same randomness. So it's kind of good, but I think the trend is quite bad already. The fact that companies are using really the same kind of tools, softwares, and API can be extremely problematic, and we don't know exactly how to deal with that. Just think of using LLM. A lot of companies have now built in chatbots built on their old data set. What if you got a bias in the data set? What happens if the LLM, which is just usually a big neural network or a predictive model, but based on data set that were biased? Who's reliable in the case of a problem coming out from the message of the API? Just look at what happened recently. Some companies, especially I think of Google, that was blamed because of the poor accuracy of the answers of their LLMs. So now we got trials. Some AI companies are sued because of the API they provide. We see more and more problems coming from all those AI techniques, right? Then we start to have also discussions about experts. So I just mentioned a very recent study asking international experts about AI risks in various domains. So we start to get some feedback about the industry because we have to admit that we don't know much about what's going on in the software industry. I mean, actuaries are not trained on that. It's very difficult to understand what's going on, and it's going extremely fast. So what we can see is that actually the industry, the software industry, is extremely concerned about the risks. And I think as actuaries, we have to look at it because at the end of the day, insurance company will be asked to cover for some possible claims asked by some companies, hospitals, or whatever, claiming that they got a loss, and at some point there will be AI in it. Okay, so it's something that we see more and more. It started with LLM a few years ago. So LLM was a big buzz. I mean, it's extremely interesting. There were a lot of discussion about hallucinations, but I think hallucination is not the issue here. It's really about try to understand what happened. Okay, try to understand exactly how LLM were deployed within companies. Try to understand exactly what happened. The problem is it's going to be extremely difficult because it's extremely easy to implement LLMs, But when you face a problem, try to get back to the roots and understand what happened will be extremely costly. And I don't see any incentives to do so. There will be a lot of problem because of the fact that there's a lot of changing environments. API keeps changing. It's very difficult to do again what happened 6 months ago exactly with the same prompt. So it's very difficult to replicate what happened and to see the downstream losses. And I don't really see how we can go further on that question. We're glad that we got some colleagues, especially in Montreal, working on those questions. Try to trace what happened when you use LLMs in the industry. Human in the loop is extremely important, but again, I don't see how we can find people who have time, competence, authority, and incentives to do so, right? So we need to spend more time on that. And the last issue, I think, is, maybe I can skip this one because I think I will be running out of time. I think we have to get back on the fact that vibe code is becoming more and more important. Vibe code is the fact that you don't code anymore. You just write a prompt, you get a code, you put that in a system, everyone is doing so you got a chain of a lot of codes. No one really knows exactly how we got it. And we start to see more and more some reverse engineering about prompts. Like you look at the output and you try to understand what happened at the beginning. Why people add this code, what did they write in the prompt? So vibe coding is a real issue, and it clearly turns software risk into provenance risk. We try to understand exactly what happened at the beginning, so we need to find the path of problem that we faced when we face a loss. So I think I'm going to stop here and leave room for other speakers and questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the introduction and for the opportunity to speak here. Today, similar to Professor Charpentier, I would like to address the topic insurance in the age of AI from two angles. These two angles are based on the two recently published Geneva Association reports. On the left-hand side, what we look is the generative AI risk when business and industry using it. Right? This is AI-generated new risks and amplify of existing risk. And on the right-hand side, we look when insurance companies deploy AI to interact with our customers and how customers feel about this AI of being used by the insurance companies. So if you're interested in those reports, you could scan the code or click the link and you could download them. Just one word about the Geneva Association. We are industry association of 90 global insurance companies. A little bit introduce about the difference between generative AI and traditional AI. For most of us who are sitting in this room, AI is just a 3.5-year-old. Right? It started in October, November 2022, and then until today. And before that, most of us wouldn't consider AI in our daily life or daily work. But then that's before after that, then we have ChatGPT, OpenAI, DeepSeek, among many other tools. Then we have the era of generative AI. So this is different from the traditional AI, as I highlighted. It's traditional AI mostly used for predictions, but also many other functions, of course. And generative AI is different. Depending on how you define it, the output can be considered as original artifacts. There are two forms of generative AI used by insurance companies or used by our insurance customers. On the left-hand side, it's insurer-provided AI. I'm an insurance company, Samsung, for example, and then I developed a tool, for example, a chatbot, and then this chatbot talk to customers. That's one type of AI, insurer-provided AI. And on the right-hand side, it's so-called off-the-shelf tools, including ChatGPT, Copilot, DeepSeek, and so on. So customers might independently use those off-the-shelf tools to to discuss insurance question, to ask insurance question, to compare insurance terms, even before they approach insurance company. So here is a quick summary of the impact of generative AI across the insurance customer journey. The first row, we show that assessment of existing digital technologies, including internet, mobile, smartphone, social media, and so on. And then the second row, we show that additional impact of generative AI on top of the existing digital technologies. What we believe is that this generative AI is more important, will have a higher impact in the area of gathering information, seeking advice. So when I ask my students in my class, so many of them would consider to ask generative AI first before they approach an insurance company. They ask, which insurance company should I go to? And it's similar question, which bank should I go to? Similar like when we consider a holiday, which city and which country we should go and what time we spend there. So this type of information gathering and the seeking advice function of generative AI is particularly important. They could also, when they get quotation from the insurance company, two quotations, one from Samsung, the other from Tokio Marine, and then they upload them all together, and then ask GPT's advice, which product is better, is more fit to me. So that's acting as a broker role of this with this generative AI. And also, on the other steps or stages of the insurance value chain, we have also some impact, for example, on the after-sales service. You could interact with an AI instead of human, and also in the claim process, making it more efficient. Here is an overview of our sample. We did customer survey of 1,000 customers in each of the 6 largest insurance company. Next time, I promise to include Korea as well. So this time, we did the 6 largest markets, China, Japan, that's in Asia, UK, France, Germany, that's in Europe, and the United States. So we have total 6,000 customers. Those people must have purchased insurance in the past 3 years, so they qualify for an insurance customer. They also need understand what generative AI is. So we have some basic testing question so that they know what we're talking about. So more or less half male and female, and equal distribution across the age range. Here are some quick summary of what we have learned from this survey. Many of them actually echo Professor Charpentier's statements just now. So whether they are aware of insurance company are using AI to serve them, they do. 45% noticed chatbots. That's the most prevailing function of AI use that customers feel. Also, they feel some of the documents offered to them are automatically generated by generative AI, like insurance policies or insurance quotes. 32% aware of that. And then I move on, how they feel about this generative AI interaction. These 2 questions are the same. We just use different form to ask the same question. How do you feel about your insurer using generative AI to interact with you? It's interesting to see that the pink and the red are the more or less in favor of using AI. So I like it. I'm okay with it as long as it provides this comparable service to human interactions. And it's important to know that 12% explicitly saying that I do not like it. Similar pattern on the right-hand side. How do you feel the experience when insurance company using AI? Also the pink and red is the majority saying that they made my experience easier, somewhat helpful, but there are 9% saying that they make my experience more complicated and less personal. So we can see from this picture that our customer has a surprisingly high acceptance or welcome attitude to insurance company using AI to interact with them. This we show a bit the country difference. That's an important slide. That's why I put it in this place. We can see the Asian markets exhibit significantly higher enthusiasm compared to Western skepticism. So China and Japan have a particularly higher percentage saying that I like AI and I'm okay with it. Well, if we look at Europe, then that's significantly less. And also, what type of services AI should do, what they should not do. So these charts saying that compare different services that AI provided. The most useful function, or the customer prefer mostly, is comparing quotes and terms, because insurance quotes and terms are difficult to understand. In the past, they might have to consult a friend. I receive a lot of calls from my classmates and colleagues saying that, can you help me to look at whether this insurance makes sense or not? Now they don't come to me. They go to ChatGPT, which offer a better answer than I do sometimes. So they demand comparing quotes and terms for different products and services. And they also demand claim handling, welcome. But if we look at the last item, where the red bar is higher than the pink bar, which means that customer in general would like to see less targeted advertising. So they don't want generative AI to push message to my cell phone selling insurance. So that's what they don't want. What are the top customer priority? That's exactly what Charpentier just said. It's trust. Insurance is all about trust. They concern about data security, accuracy of information, access to human support, and transparency. And those we think that generative AI are particularly strong with, for example, ease of use, cost effectiveness, speed of response, that's relatively less important. So the actual efficiency function of generative AI is not yet the customer's top priority. Their priorities are on the trust side. So security, accuracy, access to human support. This number is maybe a little bit inflated, I would say. But the country comparison also gave us some information. So all the previous slides, I was talking about insurance company provide AI tools. And this one is ChatGPT or DeepSeek, this independent use of third-party or off-the-shelf tools. How many respondents have said that they have used such tools when purchasing insurance? 68% globally. Maybe this is overall inflated, but we can still see the country difference. Asian countries are particularly high than continental Europe. This is also very consistent with my feeling. So when I talk to my Geneva Association colleagues in Zurich office, I asked them, do you use AI when you buy insurance? They said, of course not. Who gonna use that? But when I ask my colleagues in Beijing University, yeah, I will check. Yeah, so that's a different attitude, and we observe, and we consistently observe this culture difference in later parts of the reports, and you will see more that Asian perform very different to continental Europe, where the English-speaking countries are usually in the middle. So what this independent use of generative AI can change the insurance market. If you're an insurance company, think about your customer are educated before they come. In the past, they know very little about insurance, and insurance sales, we call it consultative sales. We educate the customer and then selling our products. But now this landscape might change. Your customer might be very well prepared when come to an insurance agency. That's why the insurance company also need to equip, train the insurance agency to catch up with this customer change. And how to do that is probably also need to equip your agencies with also AI tools that enable them to do better communication, to more understandable, more convincing than a ChatGPT. What are the customer concerns? The top concern is lack of human touch, privacy and security, and accuracy. These three are exactly the same as the priority question that we asked. We always want, when AI cannot solve the problem, I can push a button or I say, find me a human agent. That should be always available. Hallucination, Professor Charpentier also mentioned. That's an important issue related to accuracy and consistency of AI answers. Some potential solutions. So now I move to the second part of the study, which will look at what kind of risk that AI generated for society and how insurance might or might not be able to address those risks. This chart basically echo what Charpentier have said. It's only in the recent years there was a sharp increase of the use of generative AI. And these are the what specific risk category identified for generative AI. These are two types of risk that we believe most of these already exist in the past with existing technologies. And generative AI just amplified a little bit. But there are also some new risks that AI generated. For example, the workforce challenge also require AI skill, and also this might be a risk of job displacement. So these are the new risks that AI generated, but many others are just amplifying existing risk. And importantly, there are two different types. One is first-party operational risk. My company use AI. There's operational risk, systemic failure, and so on and so forth. Hacks and cyber and so on. And there are also third-party product risk, where I use AI to generate answers to my customers, doctor generate advice to their patients, and there might be a liability risk. That's a product risk. How firms use generative AI? For what purpose have you used them? That's very interesting. So all firms like already generating internal business reports or summaries. When you write a summary that I feel difficult or it's important to your boss, so you use generative AI to polish it or to generate the first draft. And then second is a customized proposal to your customers. The implementation challenge. These I find particularly interesting. So this also show a very strike difference between countries. So let's look at the top one, limited availability of skilled generative AI professionals. That basically means I don't know how to use AI. I want skills and talented people to use them. Let's also notice the number 5, resistance from colleagues, employees, or customers. That means I don't want to use AI, right? I resist. I don't like it. I don't want it. And in Asian countries and English-speaking countries, the top one, the limited availability is the most important challenge. It's a prevailing challenge. And in Germany and France, unfortunately, resistance from colleagues and employees and the customers are the top ones. We see the strike difference between countries, reflecting a culture difference where digital tolerance culture. And what type of failures have you experienced? These are the corporates, so the industry corporates. We survey 100 business in each of the 6 markets. Inaccurate information generated, that's very AI specific. So that also basically preventing companies further using of AI. So it's not accurate. But I would have to say that human-generated information or human information is also not accurate, right? But also we have higher expectation for generative AI. So that does not mean AI make more mistakes than human, but we just have a higher expectation. And the second one is the same for every digital technology, where you have a legacy system of 10 years, 20 years old, but you need a new technology to be integrated with them. There's always difficulties. For any technology, the second item, it's challenging. Do businesses have demand for Gen AI insurance? Or what kind of risk that the business want to transfer to insurers? That are cybersecurity. We can also see that's why cyber insurance is the top product that consider to be extended to incorporate AI coverage. And then the second is liability. So the operational risk and then liability risk. I skipped this. This one is important. This basically shows that the demand is not only for free coverage. So you offer me a free AI coverage, I'm happy. But actually our customers among all the countries are willing to pay a little. They're willing to pay mostly 10 to 20% of my organization's current insurance cost to extend the coverage to AI risk. This insurability, Professor Charpentier already discussed. We see some challenges, but I also see this supply side of AI risk. It's mirroring the early evolution of cyber insurance. It's like cyber insurance in 10 years ago. So in 10 years, this become a mature product. And this last page, I highlight some of the existing solutions already available in the market. Basically, there are three different attitudes towards AI insurance. Some company, that's the typical one, they set endorsement extension of existing products like cyber insurance professional liability directly officers. And some have a total exclusion. More and more companies are having that, so-called total AI exclusion. We have seen some companies are doing that. And interestingly, also some companies in Asia, in China, they develop standalone AI coverage. It's a comprehensive bundle of AI coverage of first-party and third-party risks. So they develop an AI insurance. That's all my information. Thank you very much. I'm looking forward to the discussion later. Thank you.
Good morning. It's my great pleasure to be here to deliver the talk on the cyber risk pricing. All right, so first look at the cyber incidents and also the cost trends over the years. So generally speaking, so like in the United States, every states are required, they created that breach laws, required companies and to report the cyber incidents. I think in the Asian, some countries, they have the similar rules or laws, ask the companies to report. But how they enforce this would be the problems. If you really look at the incidents, you can see from ITIC reports, there are many incidents. And also many people are just like receive the victim notice. So in terms of the financial impact by the cyber incident, you can see actually one incident can cost a lot of money. So this may be, if you try to understand this, you might want to ask why they cost so much. So this is quite different things for the cyber incidents. So generally, you might have, say, notice cost, lawsuit, particularly in US. So we have many lawyers, law firms. They wanted to look at the cyber incidents, and so they might create the classical lawsuit actions towards your companies. So then you might have to pay a lot of money. So particularly if you look at the United States, and so we have a $10 million average. So that's a lot of money. And of course, if you look at the cost in terms of the company size, for the small and medium companies, so the cost would be like around $264,000. But for the large enterprise, that's huge. So about $10 million. So look at the business interruptions. So generally speaking, you just can imagine this. If you are provide a service to many companies and many services, if you are down, so then generally it costs a lot of business interruptions. The cost would be huge. So then we look at the cyber insurance markets. So cyber insurance markets currently in 2024 is about $15 billion. But we are projecting it's going to increase 14% every year and up to 2030s. And so we are looking at $32 billion for the cyber insurance market. And so for the currently, the majority is still in the North America, is about 65% of the market. But in the next few years, we expecting the market will grow faster in the Asians. So I talked to some colleagues probably in China. So then generally last years, so they have some guidelines in the cyber insurance policies and also pushing towards the cyber insurance. So if you look at how the insurance companies doing in the United States, so those are the top 20 companies in the United States with their directly written premiums. And of course, you can see that's a lot of money. And also if you see the loss ratios with those companies, and so some of the companies are doing very well with controlling the loss ratios well below the 40%. But some of the companies are actually not doing so well. So some of them can do even over 80% of the loss ratios. So this is not a good sign with them. So if we look at which industry is most costly sector, so if you look at this, and so you can see the healthcare generally is the costliest sector. So this is easy to understand actually. So I believe probably if not all of the hospitals or clinics in the United States, they have the cyber insurance coverage, at least 80 or 90%. They do have this kind of coverage. They do have the HIPAAs and also the sensitive data informations. So then they need to protect. And of course, if they receive the ransomware attack, that would be a disaster. So then you can see the cost for the healthcare would be about $9 million. So that's a lot of money. On the right side, so this is actually something different from the traditional insurance. For the cyber risk, actually, we have the concept called the mean time to identify and the mean time to contain. So what's the meaning of this? It generally says if your company is breached, you may not immediately know the breach. So it might after a couple of months or sometimes even over the years, and you detect this breach. And of course, when you detect this breach, information is already breached or already have some damage over there. So the mean time to identify in 2025 is about 181 days. And so the mean time to contain is about 2 months for this. So the overall cycle is about 2 40 days for this. It's different features of the cyber risk. Talking about the AI risk, so our previous two speakers already mentioned this. So actually, things is really related to the cyber, and so then we can see the cyber incidents involves the AI models. We can look at those categories, and you do have the supply chain and the model inversions, and also prompt injections, and also the poisons, which simply means if you have the AI models, sometimes people can, based on the output, try to infer what kind of sensitive information was fed into your models. And so you also can manipulate the LLMs to produce the wrong results by feeding them with some wrong informations. So if you look at the impacts of the incidents on authorized AI, and so then you can see there are some operational interruptions, and also reputational damage, and all of the related impact by the AI risk. So then if we're looking at the cyber risk, so generally speaking, in the North America, it's kind of becoming mature, but the pricing model is still developing, although they have the different policies, try to help the regulations, try to help these industries, but pricing is still the issues. This is mainly caused by a couple of things. So generally, this is really cyber risk is fast-moving threats. Things particularly with the AI, actually, you can just write the code. And so using the hack tools, very easily to attack some systems. So the second would be the interdependence and also the accumulations. Things right now, many companies are doing the business by using the cloud. And so then the clouds, shared cloud systems, softwares, and also the third-party vendors, they do provide a service, and so they are all collected. So then the third one is actually the claim histories are limited. So there are some considerations. Probably companies may not be willing to report those kind of informations, although sometimes they are required to. But this is going to be some issues. And also we have the heavy tail losses. Things you could imagine if we do have one common vulnerabilities is just discovered by the hacker, if we have the zero-day vulnerabilities, and so then the huge damage can be caused for this. So then if we look at the insurance companies, how they really pricing the cyber risk. So there are three main categories. One is the exposure views by simply look at the size, company size, and sector, revenues, and the records, vendors, and also their security controls. Try to look at this. The other ones is a little bit more advanced. Try to use the scans. They have the scan tools to do the assessments of the security of these companies. In the United States, there are several companies, they provide this kind of service by providing the security reports to assess or give the scores of the companies, how security they are. So then the third one is about the scenario studies or stress testings. So this is probably just saying if a company is over there, and so try to look at if we include these companies into your portfolios, whether it was cause a lot of issues, if they can cause the companies in your portfolios sharing the risks. So this is the third ones, but they all have some limitations. Sometimes they need the control qualities or they need expert judgment on those. So if we check in their public rating of findings, actually, mathematically speaking, and so we can look at the pricing of formulas. One is the flat rate. It's pretty simple. Just fix premiums for the different coverage. And so by considering the frequencies, severities, and also the different loading ratios. The second one is by considering the hazard group, which means different sectors. So they do issue the different premiums and coverage limits and also the retentions. The third one would be the best rate based on the exposure-based premiums. And so then we adjust for the limit, retentions, and also the industry factors. And so the last one would be including some risk modifiers by looking at the claims histories, security controls, and sub-limits and policies, all of those kind of things. So if we put them together, and so then you can see it from here, these formulas are mainly used in the industries by looking at the coverage, look at what kind of modules they cover, saying the third-party liabilities or the first-party. And so then the system interruptions for the sublines, and so they have the coverage limit and the things over there. So then they create the best premiums for the companies and for the different coverage modules. And so modify this by looking at the rating factors in terms of considering the limits, retentions, and etc. So in practice, so they also charge the minimum premiums. So they do have the minimum they want to charge for profit. So sometimes they do have the surcharge if the companies have some incidents over there. So one thing in practice we are looking at is just the scenario modules. So in a sense is when we look at the cyber insurance account, which means if you buy the cyber insurance, we create an account for you. But we do look at the portfolios. For one of the companies, we want to assess if this company try to buy the cyber insurance from us, we look at how dangerous if we include you into our portfolios, if we create your account. This is mainly main consideration is whether you would cause the systematic risk or we would have some, for example, if you are a cloud provider, so whether you can cause my portfolios to have a huge loss by including you into my portfolios. So this is the problems. And of course, if from the portfolio funding levels, so for example, if you are the high ransomware aggregations, and so the possible response, we probably say, well, we will need you to have the high retentions and also create the tighter ransomware sublimit. And also we will need you to have a very strong security controls. So those kind of things. So this is actually when the insurance companies try to price the cyber risk, they need to consider the portfolio level risk as well. All right, so by looking at this, so those are the challenges we are looking at. So as I mentioned, is the dynamic threats, systematic accumulation risk, and extreme loss, and also and sparse data and the reporting bias. Things for the cyber incidents, generally we may not be able to know all of the incidents, particularly even for the reportings. So we do not know all of this. So then, just in terms of those kind of risk, we do some research on this part to address some of the issues. Say, just in terms of the dynamic risk and how can we do this, we propose probably should have some online models to assess the risk, which means you do not really have to deploy your models every 6 months or every 3 months. So we just deploy the models online over the cloud and try to let the models to update the risk when the information is coming. So if you look at this plot, generally is we are going to use the historical information to create the models, and by considering, and of course here there are some technical terms, marginal models, dependence modelings, and ensembles. And so then you put everything together. If some new information or new incidents is coming, so we update all of the parameters. So then we do not need the engineering to deploy your code models again. So it's automatically online updatings and try to produce the predictive risk for the insurance companies to use. So the second is probably in terms of the portfolio risk or systematic risk. And so then generally we consider there are dependence over there. Two kinds of dependence. One is the temporal and how it changes along the time. The others would be the sector informations. The different companies or different sectors, they do have this kind of dependence, because the cyber risk, we all know they have some kind of vulnerabilities. If it is over there, shared by those companies, they do create this kind of cross-sector dependence. And so for this kind of portfolio risk, and how can we consider this kind of dependence? If you do consider those companies' informations, like the company size, and revenues and histories, how do you throw all of those informations into the modelings? Well, generally, we would like to borrow the deep learning techniques. So this is just one example in our studies, and we created like encoder and also two decoders. By using the encoders, try to encode all of the company's levels informations into our model. And so then we try to use the decoders to create the frequencies and also the severities for the insurance companies. So by considering all of those companies' informations and histories, dependence, to put everything together. So here is some thoughts about the next generation's cyber insurance. Right now, we do have the cyber insurance companies. They provide the policies, but most of them are still based on like 6 months, 3 months, or 1 year policies. So everything changes fast with the AI. So here is actually for the next generation, I would say probably we would need to link the cyber telemetry and also the residual risk quantifications and price indicators, and also we can use the AI to draft the policies and to record everything on the blockchains. So we would settle everything on the smart ledger. So this is actually how can you really implement this by creating the near-term product designs. So generally speaking, is when for a company who wants to purchase the cyber insurance, we do like these companies to have like the network flow monitors, like IDS, EDRs. They can try to block some attacks risks. And so then after that, you do have the residual risk. And so this residual risk, we are going to price this, and we are going to insure this. So then we say you can do this monthly or 2 weeks or 3 months at the most. And so then we have this kind of policies coverage. So then you can do the monthly subscriptions, or even do something like pay as you go, this kind of policies. All right, so let me conclude. So generally is current industries, they do realize on probably some rating tables and other exposure measures. AI actually can help by drafting all of the policies and so attract the informations, even the security controls. The modeling challenge is still over there. We still have to work on this. And also, of course, the future product is definitely should be AI assisted underwritings, preventions, and also the portfolio monitorings, governance pricing reviews. All right, I'm just going to stop here, and thank you.
Okay, so let me repeat. This is joint, title that's joint. It's a joint talk by me and my PhD student, Eugenia Feng. I will talk the first 10 minutes. She will follow up the next 10 minutes. Let me start. Maybe you can control. Oh, I do need this, right? Okay. Systemic risk and joint market and climate stress. Keywords here. Systemic risk, we are going to give very brief introduction. Then, but our focus is on joint market and climate stress. Okay, here. This is the outline, sorry for that. Motivation, followed up with theoretical development. Then I will cover the first two chapters. Afterwards, Eugenia will cover data and estimation, empirical findings, and concluding remarks. Let's go to motivation. Systemic risk, I assume we more or less know the concept. I'm not going to go to details. Essentially, it refers to such kind of risk. I have three keywords here. The first one, distress in the financial market will propagate. It cannot stay there. It will propagate. The second one here, so this kind of risk will impair the stability of the financial system. The third one, most important part, is the systemic risk will generate spillover loss to the real economy. If such risk fulfills such three features, we call it systemic risk. So in the aftermath of the global financial crisis, we know a rich body of research on systemic risk. We large literature there. We don't go to literature review. But our focus now is on climate change. Climate change poses additional source of systemic risk to the financial stability. So this topic now, climate change risk is systemic. Such a topic has drawn big amount of attention from industry and academia. We see references there. But we also see here, since systemic risk has been so extensively studied, also people in academia and industry all agree climate change is systemic. Now our question here is, there's not much research here so far to measure systemic contribution of, specifically due to climate change risk. So this is our topic, climate systemic risk. So we come up with a measurement to try to fill in this gap. There's a recent paper here, Zhong et al. Zhong, by the way, is Korean. The paper was on website for many years, now eventually published in a top journal, GFE. So our target is to quantify systemic climate risk for a sector. This sector across different market and climate stress scenarios. Okay, let's move on. Just now I said joint market and climate stress. So in our work, we treat market and climate stresses as distinct concepts. So climate stress, as we like in traditional study of systemic risk, just market-wide financial distress. Climate stress means the manifestation of climate-related risks in financial market. But this stress is still in the form of market stress, but due to the reason of climate change. So this part is called climate stress. So these two stress resources, they could interact. So first here, climate stress can trigger or exacerbate episodes of market stress, thereby constituting a distinct source of systemic risk. So that means here, climate stress can be a form of market stress. But the other way, market stress can also arise from all kinds of other reasons, like not just climate. Of course, climate is a very important one, but it could be political, could be war, some social other events, or even just market itself. So therefore, market stress and climate stress should be treated as two different concepts. That's the point here. So we are going to examine systemic risk and a unified framework. So this framework we are going to develop. This we call it unified in the sense that this framework will accommodate many kinds of combinations of market and climate stress. Let's move on. So here, before we talk about that, here it's a compounding effect. So the term first came from climate change, but the compounding we talked about is compounding between market and financial stress. So that means the compounding here causes the financial domain and the climate domain. It's not just within the climate domain. So here I like to cite this Achaya paper. It gives a very good summary here. So he essentially summarizes, so the paper summarizes 3 mechanisms which cause interplay between climate and financial crisis. 3 mechanisms which I totally agree. The first one is coincidental occurrence. Just there's no reason, no causality and so on. They just occur simultaneously, coincidentally. Yeah, this could be reason, but this reason we understand if they are really independent, the chance will be extremely low. The second one is shared underlying cause. So some common shock which cause stress in both market and climate. And the third one is causality. So one stress can cause the occurrence of the other one. So the last one is the most important. There are a lot of references there. Okay, so next one, within climate change risks, now we need to distinguish physical risk and transition risk. Due to time scope, we move very quickly here. So we don't give strict definitions. Our focus will be on transition risk rather than physical risk. So the reason is the following here. The first, physical risks, they are like a flood, hurricane, even acute events and chronic events. They are devastating, but their effects are often geographically contained. So not likely, so such events will draw big consequences in system-wide financial distress. Therefore, in systemic risk scope, probably physical risk is less important, but physical risk is a typical topic in insurance. We have to model from insurance side. We look at the loss data and so on. But transition risk will be different. A disorderly transition to a low-carbon economy, if it's abrupt, it can have substantial systemic consequences through many channels, like abrupt and anticipated changes in climate policy. So those carbon-intensive companies will suffer. So such things will have some direct consequences to the financial market. Therefore, transition risk is probably more important source for systemic risk than physical risk. But physical risk itself is also an important topic. That's more towards the insurance side. Okay, now the question is how to model transition risk. So this is the question not easy to answer, because transition risk essentially means disorderly transition to low carbon situation. So how to model it? So here, there are very, very newly emerging references. Robert Engel, so they build up a concept, climate news hedging portfolio. They construct the portfolio based on climate news, where even they don't count good news or bad news, just more news or less news. So the next one, the paper I mentioned just now. So this paper constructed a few transition risk portfolios. So essentially, the idea is such a transition risk factor, the portfolio is return will go up if a transition risk, if a transition policy risk arises, or the other way, return will go down if a transition risk become high or become weak. So anyway, the rationale behind is such a portfolio return can be used to hedge climate risk. So then that means in the mimic way or opposite way. So then this portfolio will represent transition risk. So next paper also here we cite here also construct some similar hedging portfolios. So we will follow this literature to construct market-based measure for systemic climate risk. We use the transition risk portfolios they have constructed. We test some results in our setting. So the comments here, market-based approach here. So that means it's purely based on returns of sector or industry or overall market or such a tailored portfolio. So the pros are the following, because this approach will avoid balance sheet data, usually which are confidential, not easy to get. So that's why it brings bigger convenience if we are able to do research based on market returns. Also, because results are based on market returns, they will embed human behavior and so on. That's why results are forward-looking and time-varying, because they can easily capture such features. But the cons question, I guess this occur everywhere. When we deal with climate risk, so usually there's no direct result, some number to measure that is climate risk. So the thing we can do, we look at proxies. So now proxies we use are like market returns. Question now is, are these proxies accurate? That's the question here. Okay, now we go to theoretical development. I will go quickly. So here, just now I mentioned market returns. We use the following. So we look at the 3 returns. First one, a sector, which we specify later by Eugenia. Second one, RM is the overall market return. The last one is most important one is a transition risk portfolio. We look at its return. So we construct the climate risk portfolio, then look at the return. This return is interpreted as a transition risk. But we look at the risk side because we look at the systemic risk. On the risk side, we look at negative returns instead, negative values. Next one here. So first, before we go to results, first quantile, F inverse, which is also value at risk, defined that way. Okay, now next item here. Given a set A, we call it a stress set. So through that, we define such AP, we call it a stress scenario. So X means the previous page. Oh, it doesn't work like. Oh, okay. Oh, no, it certainly is something wrong here. Okay, let me use this to easy. I want to go back to, anyway. So here, Y means market risk, market stress. Z means climate stress. So here, they are scaled by their quantiles. Through this, we define AP. You imagine if A is defined by the following cases, Y0, Z0, they are suitably chosen thresholds. To mean, after thresholds means the scenario, stress occurs. Lower than that means normal state. Okay, this way AP will be stress scenario accordingly. So we have different combinations. Like if we only look at market stress, just delete Z. No constraints on Z, the first case. If we only look at climate stress, we delete Y. We only look at Z, and so on. Due to time, let's skip. So this setting, as I said, is a unified framework which combines all kinds of stress combinations. Oh, next one. This conditional expect shortfall, I assume many people know here. If for any case, we explain again. So without AP, this is standard definition of expect shortfall. But we put AP as condition, this becomes to be conditional expect shortfall. But this one here, the threshold I highlight is value at risk. So just here, there are 2 parameters, P and Q. P controls the stress level. In the stress set I showed just now, Q controls the confidence level. So there are 2 parameters, P and Q. So through this, conditional expect shortfall essentially means expected loss in the up tail, conditional on the stress set, over the threshold, which we define as a marginal VAR. So this is conditional expect shortfall. It's a quite well-established concept from the reference here, from the reference we cited here. But we follow some slightly different style due to some subtlety. Due to time, I don't explain. So now question is, so how to model X, Y, and Z? They are returns. We suppose we have market data. How to model? So empirical insights, which we must keep in mind, are that negative returns are heavy-tailed, and tail dependent. So this comes with the definition here, regular variation. So regular variation is a setting to capture heavy tails. So essentially, you don't need to know the definition. Definition a little bit technical. Just Pareto distribution is here. So we can simply rewrite that in the following way. These two expressions are equivalent. I just change variable p equal to fx. Then x would be quantile of p. Rewrite so this way. Rewrite this way, but we see some insight. If we understand here, larger than y means a set from y to infinite. That means some kind of stress set. So here, this will be a measure which has power tail. So this gives a hint how to introduce MRV. So univariate, regular variation, these are equivalent. Like this, just I put more arguments, then I get MRV. MRV here, so definition is given there, you can extend to any dimension. So the hint I can give here is, you imagine any random vector, any vector of risks. If you know they are heavy-tailed, then you use whatever link, multivariate model or copula to link. The consequence is they are MRV. Therefore, this concept is quite broad. Okay, So this is our result here. We give a result, we give a asymptotic estimation for conditional expected shortfall. So here, the insight is, first one here, left-hand side tells conditional expected shortfall is scaled by this inverse function. Right-hand side, there's no real event. So that means we convert such a problem to some stable quantity. This is explicit, but there's a way we can do stable calculation. Now I pass to Eugenia, sorry. So I give you a few minutes to finish your part.
Okay, so I will try to finish like in 5 minutes maybe. Okay, so thanks Qihe for the introduction and the theory. Yes, so now welcome to the real world. So I'm going to introduce the data and the estimation procedure. So as we mentioned, we do a market-based framework, which means all our data are from traded sector and factor returns. So the sample I'm using is from 2008 to 2026, and I divide this whole period into 3 sub-periods. So the first sub-period is the global financial crisis, and the second period is a very calm period. So it's between the financial crisis and the COVID-19 crisis. And the third period is characterized by the COVID-19, the inflation, and the political and energy shocks. For the sectors, we are using the sector ETFs, including like these 11 sectors. And for the market factor, we are using SPY, the Standard Poor's 500 as our baseline. And for the climate transition factors, actually you can see in the list we have 4. But for our baseline, we are using the EMIT, which is emission weighted transition risk factor. So basically the intuition behind is if we have a low return on the climate transition factors, we think there is an increase in the transition rate risk. Okay. So just to give you some preliminary idea about this sector exposure to climate risk. So here I plot the climate betas with half-a-year rolling window controlling for SPY. So I'd like to draw your attention to the upper right panel, which is EMIT. So you can see the blue line on the top. Maybe I can use the, yeah, sure. So the blue line on the top is the oil and gas sector. So you can see there is a positive climate beta for the oil and gas sector, which means they are more exposed to climate transition risk. But you will see later in our analysis, the systemic risk ranking need not to be the same as the climate transition risk exposure ranking. So here is our estimation workflow. So here I dropped a lot of technical details. So basically we start from the negative returns, and we first test whether our data satisfies the MRV framework. We follow the paper, a very recent paper by Imo et al. And then we move forward to estimate the marginal tails, which we use the heel tail estimator, and we also do the spectral measure estimation. Basically, we are using a non-parametric way to estimate. And then we move to specify the stress test. As mentioned by Qihe, we have like market-only scenario, climate-only scenario, and the most important, the joint scenario. And then we plug everything together to calculate the COES estimation. Okay, so here are some results. So the first page is on the marginal tails. So basically, if you focus on the gray bars, it's the tail index for the full period sample. So basically, you can see the value of the tail index is around 2 and 3. So basically, the smaller value of the tail index, the heavier tail is of the data. Okay, so basically, so this figure supports our usage of heavy tail. And if you compare the gray bars with the blue ones, so the blue ones represent the period 3, which is a very turbulent period with COVID-19 and the energy and the political shocks. You can see the tail index becomes smaller compared to the gray one, which means the sector marginal tail becomes heavier during period 3. Okay. So here is the result for our spectral measure. So basically, we are doing a 3-dimensional thing. So you can see I draw a triangular here. So on the top is the sector ETF, and on the right bottom is the climate, and on the left bottom is market. So basically, if the point appears near some corner, it means the individual dimension drives the whole extreme. But when the point appears in the middle, it means a joint occurrence of extreme. So basically, you can see for the oil and gas, the interior region is a little bit empty, right? But if you look at these financials, you can see there are a lot of dots in the middle, which means for financial sector, there is more likely to have 3-dimensional joint tail events. Okay. So I'm moving to the empirical findings. Basically, I will have 3 slides on that. So the first slide is on our main COES result. So the blue dots here, they represent the climate-only scenario. So you can see under the climate-only stress, we have the oil and gas and energy sector rank the highest, right? But if you move to the red dots, which represents the joint stress, we have financials. Financials rank the first, right? So you can see the ranking changes under different scenarios, and this ranking is robust under alternative combinations of market and climate factors, as I mentioned before. So our second result is on the relative gap. So basically, we calculate the difference between the COES of joint scenario and the COES of a standalone scenario, and compare it over the previous standalone scenario. So basically, we find the amplification effect is economically large, and the financial sector, you can see it here, the amplification effect can reach 60%. Okay, so it means that if you only look at a standalone stress scenario, you will miss about 60% of the risk if you measure by COES. And that's the last slide on my results. So basically, you can see a time variation. So, the x-axis is the 3 period. If you look at the black dashed line, it's the average over the 11 sectors. So you can see in line with our intuition for period 2, there is relatively calm period, right? So we have a relative lower amplification effect. But if we move to period 3, you can see it increase. So which means in period 3, the amplification effect becomes stronger. And also the amplification effect is sector specific. So the blue line represents the energy sector, while the right line represents the financials. So you can see the trend of this amplification are quite different for these 2 sectors. Okay, so I'm going to conclude our presentation. So basically, we have a market-based COES framework, and we use extreme value and analysis. As a main result, or your main takeaway for today, is that even if, for example, the energy sector ranks the highest under climate transition exposure, it does not need to be the most important systemic climate risk contributor. Okay, so thank you for your attention, and here is our reference list, which you have already seen. If you are interested, we have a working paper available upon request. Thank you very much.
Thank you to the organizers for this wonderful event, and the sponsors for having us all here. My first time in Korea, and I'm very happy to be here with all of you. So I apologize to the academic participants because you've already heard this talk at another conference, I'm sure. But when they organized this event, they wanted to have some talks on climate risk, so they invited me to give this talk. So I hope at least some people here haven't heard it before. This is joint work also with a bunch of people. Let's see. So there's a team in Madrid where I'm based right now, at least for a few months of the year. So there's a team at Complutense University, it's the largest university in Madrid, and a PhD student, Nan, who just finished and is a postdoc now at China Ray in China. Oops. I'm having the same trouble as you. Okay. Then I'm a member of this research chair in France, Cher Dialogue, who's sponsored by the largest life insurer in France, CNP Assurance. And they have, Anani Olympio was their research director at the company, and led this project. He's back now to another department in prospective risks for the company. And another member of the chair that worked on this project was Xavier Millot, who used to be at Lyon, University of Lyon, but is now in Aix-Marseille. Let's see. That was part of the project that happened in Italy. So this is work with a group at Sapienza, University of Sapienza in Rome, Barbara Rogo and her student Stefano De Martis. And finally, talking at a conference like this, I met Cem, who was a PhD student in Ankara, and I knew his supervisor for a long time. She's the organizer of the next EAJ conference, European Actuarial Journal. And they were working on something very similar, so we ended up working together. Okay, so I sent 61 slides covering all these topics. Obviously, in 20 minutes, or even if I take 25 like Qihe, there won't be time to cover all the 61 slides. But I thought I'd send it in so that those of you that are interested on the topic, you can read more at ease at home. I'd like to start with this slide. So this is from a report of Swiss Re, quite recent one. And in dark, you have the losses. This is global, all the world. Losses due to earthquakes. So when I was an actuarial student, earthquakes were the typical example of low frequency, high severity. So, well, yeah, there's some high severity some years, but compared to the green bars, they don't look like very high. What are the green bars? They're weather-related events. They seem to be both high frequency and high severity globally. I don't know in Korea, maybe this is not true. I've been told that here climate or natural catastrophes are not so challenging as in other countries yet, but this is a global phenomenon, so eventually you'll be hit. You can see the progress. In fact, the 2025 value is estimated on that trend line. Now it has been observed, and I checked back, and it's over what they had estimated. So these are billions of US dollars globally. But this is a slide that really speaks to me, and I think I got involved in this because of this. So again, this is global losses. In dark, it's the insured losses. And in green, the uninsured losses. So you can see the trend again. It's not getting better, and we seem to be, as a sector, talking about the insurance sector, doing a worse job. The protection gap is increasing, so a lot of people are exposed, and this is not going to stop tomorrow. So if you're a millionaire and you see your house burned in a wildfire in California, maybe you can survive that. But if your house is all your life savings and it burns, and this is happening more and more often, and that's a problem that I think the sector should address, right? So, okay, so what's the industry outlook on? So yes, it's a systemic risk, and it's an emerging risk, like cyber risk is an emerging risk, or AI risk is an emerging risk. And it's a quite different emerging risk. In a way, it doesn't respect many of the founding principles of insurance. And I think Arthur has written about this, and many other authors, because it's very difficult to diversify this risk. If it's a global phenomenon, how do you geographically diversify? How do you pool risk? So all the typical tools and principles on which insurance rests don't necessarily apply directly with climate risk. When I present this, I've seen an array of outlooks from very pessimistic to very optimistic. So I'll start with the very optimistic. Some people see this in the sector as a new opportunity, so this is a new risk, so we can design new products, we have to be creative, it has to be innovative, but it's a new opportunity for the sector, right? And I give some references of people that defend that opinion. On the very pessimistic side, well, you know about the US insurers that have strategically gone out of the business in at least fires in California, the floods in Florida. So that goes back to the previous slide where the protection gap is increasing. Okay, so that's on the theoretical side. In terms of dollars, so what's the impact that this can have for insurance companies? So why should they be involved? Again, this comes from an older Swiss Re report, but they estimated that the cost due to this climate change risk would increase losses by 30 to 63% by 2040. So again, a 15 years range. Still better than climatologists that go to 2,100, or pension people that also go to 2,100. But I won't be there to see it, so 2040 is a good horizon for me. And that's quite a wide range of estimate. The same report says it's much worse for countries that are further exposed than the average. This is global. And among those here you have China. Apparently in Europe, France, and the UK are really exposed. Their companies are very exposed, and in Germany, to this kind of claims. In any case, whatever your position is on the debate, I think it's important for actuaries to get involved and to bring solutions from an actuarial perspective. I go to climatology conferences now, and they're very happy to see people that can monetize this. They're very good at the sort of physical risk projections, at these climate models, the physics and all that, but there's the monetary aspect, right? So I think actuaries can contribute, are contributing to the debate, and they should. So how do you measure this risk if the sector is to insure it? There's, again, quite a number of ways to do it. I'll only talk about one, in part because I don't have time to do more, but there's a whole array of indexes and measures, risk measures, available to you. NOAA in particular has a very long list. Many of those are used for some specific perils, or by financial markets to define derivative products, for example. There's the Actuarial Climate Index that at least the actuarial audience here will know about because it was developed by actuarial societies in North America. But there are other climate risk measures, and I give just one reference to one paper where they adapt a bit like the talk before, they adapt an expected shortfall to this climate risk. Okay, so the Actuaries Climate Index, I hope everyone here knows about it already. If you don't, you'll find in the slides a very short introduction. The way I like to present it is, it's a proxy, as Qihe would say, for what's happening in a complex phenomenon, which is the environment. Climate is very complex to model, so it's a simple proxy. It's not the first time in economic analysis that people do that. The Consumer Price Index is a good example of that. Consumer Price Index is simply a basket of goods and services that you buy, let's say, every month, and you just see the escalation in the price of that standard basket. The way you calculate or what you put in your basket is not as important as how it evolves over time. That's really where the information is. Well, it's the same thing with the actual climate index. You will see this is a non-technical talk. It's very simple, the way they calculate it. But what's important is how the value changes over time. So it's defined so that an increase in the index points to an increase in the frequency and severity of extreme events that could generate related claims for insurers. Okay, so if you visited the webpage of the North American Actuarial Societies that have developed the climate index, that has a dedicated page, this is what they have as an example. This is an old picture. The vertical bars are the value of the index every season, every 3 months. They calculate every month, but they report it every 3 months. Now, how do they do it? They look at anomalies. This comes from climatology, the IPCC reports. An anomaly is the temperature today compared to what it should be. How do they know what it should be? So they use a reference period. They calculate the mean and the standard deviation of the variable over the reference period, and any future value they compare to that. How? They do like professors do. They calculate Z-scores. They take the value, they remove the mean, and they divide by the standard deviation. That allows them to combine values that are for different things. Some are frequency-based, like numbers of days without rain. Some are severity-based, so for example, number of millimeters of rain. So they can combine values that are not on the same scale because they remove the scales, right? Okay, so here they used a reference period from 1961 to 1990, so roughly 30 years, and they continue to calculate it afterwards every 3 months. They standardized the index so that it would have a zero average over the reference period. So you can see some vertical bars above zero, some vertical bars below zero. The black line is the 5-year long-term, sort of 5-year average, long-term tendency, and the moving average. What do we see? After the reference period, the index started to be above average almost systematically every year. And the increase, the trend in the value, seems to be strong and sustained. This is Canada and the US combined. Here it stops in 2016. We will see more across the world. I've included a short history of the indexes so far. So this was the first one to be reported. It was the result of a joint task force of the Canadian Institute of Actuaries, Society of Actuaries, Casualty Actuarial Society, so all the North American actuarial professional organizations. Their first goal was to develop a pedagogical tool to raise awareness among actuaries of the problem, develop a simple analytical tool that could quantify this risk and see how it progresses. There are no projections here. It's all based on observed data, past data. In North America, they use weather stations. So it's a big continent. They are sparse, but they have it at a very high frequency in time, daily data, but sparse geographically. Okay. This is the same index that we recalculated and updated to now, and put in red when it's above average. So you can see there's a strong, like I said, sustained trend, right? Okay, since then, the idea has been replicated in many places, in part to see if the methodology is adaptable to other realities, in Europe in particular. So some indexes have been calculated. In the UK, they were one of the first ones. Curie published a paper in the Institute and Faculty of Actuaries, where he said essentially, if the data were available like it is for a long time in North America, then the methodology would be applicable. But he didn't actually calculate the UK index. It has been now. It hasn't been published yet, but it has been now. Australia were working at the same time. The two work groups or task forces, they talked to each other. So roughly at the same time, they also published on their website. This is Australia, different reference period, starts in 81. Same methodology, but not the same variables. They only use 4 out of the 6 that were used in North America. But look at the trend. Different continent, different reference period, different variables. But the tool is saying essentially the same thing. It's not getting better. So after that, something similar was done in Turkey. Fortunately, it was only done for data for the province of the capital city, Ankara. It's an interior region, no sea level variable that was used. So I'm not going to report it because it's not comparable. Then I came to Spain during the COVID, and I talked about the index to the Institute of Actuaries in Spain. They had a task force, but they hadn't calculated anything yet because they were waiting for the data. So with those colleagues you saw pictures of, we actually got a database from Copernicus, the ERA Land 5. It's what we call reanalysis data. So it has been continued geographically. Instead of having sparse stations, which they had, to fill in the gaps because climate risk is heterogeneous geographically, they use imputation methods, classical imputation methods, interpolations, and both in space and in time when there's data that's missing, to have a very high resolution grid of information. 0.1 degrees of latitude by 0.1 degrees of longitude. The longitude and latitude of Spain, that's about 11 kilometers by 11 kilometers, you get a data point. And this is what we got. So this is the Iberian index. It's Portugal and Spain together, because otherwise you miss the west coast, the Atlantic coast of the peninsula. So to have sort of continuum of sea level variables, we calculated for both countries. Same reference period, same methodology, different kind of data, completely different continent. If you're interested, Nan, the student, he published an R package and the R values updated to 2024. So you can, if you get will they get the electronic version of the slides? I don't know, Kunming. But if they do, you can just click on the links. The paper was published. We submitted it to the journal. The Institute of Actuaries in Spain has a journal, a research journal. And since we sort of calculated before them, so they didn't get mad, we submitted it there and they published it. So in France, I told you about so I talked about this in France and we did the same thing. And that's the value in France. So maybe in Korea it's not the same. But like I was telling Kwon-Ming, I think it'd be the first country where I see that it's not the same. So far, everywhere we've checked, we see a global phenomenon, at least with this methodology. The advantage of high-resolution data, and I hope you have it for Korea, is that you can do analysis per variable. Like this is just the high temperatures. T90 means the 90th percentile, so the extreme high temperatures like we're experiencing now in Europe. You can do it by season only. You can do it by specific sub-region if you want. You can see the summers are getting worse. Huh? And in France, we published a green book, plus the programmer was a professional programmer from CNP. He did both a R package and actually did all the calculations in Python, so a Python package as well, and they're all on GitHub. You can download them if you want to do it for Korea. That saves you a lot of time. You still have to wait to download all the data. That's what takes time. Last that I've got involved with was the Italian one. Barbara decided to paint the seasons in different colors so you can distinguish when it's the worst. In yellow, it's the summer, and in orange, the fall, so you can see the peaks occur there. But you can see in Italy, a slightly different methodology because they don't use the C variable the same way we did in the other countries, but very comparable and same trends. Okay, so I don't have time anymore, but I was supposed to talk about applications of this. So yeah, there are other indexes that have been calculated that I wasn't involved with. In South Africa was the latest. Well, there are applications to this. Apart from providing a pedagogical tool that is objective, that is based only on observed data, and that's publicly available, it can also be used as a proxy. And it has been successfully in several projects. So I don't have much time to, but you can read it. In Spain, it has been used for losses that are covered by there's a consortium in Spain that was generated initially during the years of terrorism. So it covered all the losses due to bombings and so on. When that stopped, it got converted, and it covers natural catastrophes. And in particular, it covers losses for agriculture. So hailstorm was an example where some colleagues, they got data for all the losses for all of Spain on hailstorm for grapes grown to produce wine. And it turned out to be a significant proxy in the prediction of cost, and it helps you monetize. If there's an increase of 1 point of the index, how much do you expect the cost for that insurance cover to go up? There are people here in the audience that have worked on dependence analysis between the crop yields and the ACI. With this Turkish student that I mentioned, we did something similar. We actually looked, in the US, they sell weather derivative products that are based on very simple indexes. For example, number of days you need to turn the heating on, or number of days you need to turn the air conditioning on. That are used by several industries, and the energy sector and others, among others, but also the weather derivative-based indexes, the weather-based derivative products. And I mentioned the techniques we use, but you can use the ACI to improve the pricing and the edging of those. That has already been published in risks. This is the example I mentioned for grapes in Spain, and you can see the heterogeneity from one province to the other, and you can monetize how much the increase, 1 point increase in the index would produce in terms of the expected losses. Other applications are obviously in parametric insurance. That's very common in Asia, not so common in Europe, so I'm going to skip that. Not only the actual climate index is used as a proxy in insurance. In France, they have this problem with soils that are made of argile. So when they dry up, they crack. And when you build houses on soils like that, and the moisture of the soil goes down below a certain threshold, the houses, they crack. And insurers cover that risk. So they have a long history of data for those losses. And these people, it's a team from Sorbonne. They published an analysis where they use soil wetness or soil dryness index and how they can use it as a proxy to predict those costs. I'm going to go very quickly. The project I've been working on in Spain was on excess mortality due to heat waves. We have a heat wave right now in Spain that has been going on for 3 weeks. There's air conditioning in Spain, but still there's excess deaths. You well know that most deaths occur in winter. That's universal. But there are deaths that occur in the summer that are related to physical conditions triggered by heat waves. This is a study by the Institute of Actuaries, so you can see the seasonality in the number of deaths. The peaks are in the winter, but those red bars are the excess deaths due to heat waves. So you can quantify this through indexes. Okay, so just a very short survey of current research on the mortality topic and health and other applications. Just like to finish by saying that even though we didn't think at the beginning that this would be a off-the-shelf tool to use for insurance pricing or reserving, it has been done, and some companies have adopted it. In France, Covéa, which is their largest non-life insurance company, they've already adopted our French ACI, and they incorporated it to their natural catastrophe modeling. It's true in other countries. For example, there's a project right now in Morocco with, they only have one national reinsurer. It's called Atlantic Re, and they already adapted the ACI methodology, calculated a Moroccan index, and they've adapted it to their CatNat model as well. I'm working with other people on other topics, but I don't have time to cover it. So thank you very much for your attention, and I leave you with a long list of references.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Peng Shi from University of Wisconsin-Madison. I know it's a bit of cliche by repeating, thanking the organizers, but I think it's well deserved. Thank you guys for putting together this great event and also give me the opportunity to share some of my recent work. This is work jointly done with two collaborators from University of International Business and Economics, Zhengxiao Li and Yifan Huang. Unfortunately, neither of them can make it here, so I'll represent the team to share some results. So today I will talk about how to incorporate weather information into insurance rate making and product management. This is a very preliminary work. Certainly comments and questions welcome. I'll give you a brief roadmap. I'll start with a classic actuarial pricing model, in particular for short-term insurance. And then I'll move on to the key component where we introduce this framework, try to incorporate weather information into the pricing. I also want to apologize for a change of the title of the talk because I feel like deep learning is actually not the emphasis of this talk, but rather the idea of how to incorporate that weather information. But in our framework, we did leverage the neural network kind of technique to implement. And we also introduced a multi-task learning approach to address some practical issues, which I will discuss in a minute. We'll demonstrate through a case study using some Chinese insurance data, and then I will conclude. Okay, so this is the sort of classic pricing framework I have in mind when I think about how insurers price the short-term insurance product. You can think about the examples like homeowner insurance, automobile insurance, for personal lines. So the general idea here is, as an insurer, we want to certainly charge the premium that is proportional to the underlying risk of the policyholder. So you start with a task which we call risk classification, where you want to create homogeneous risk classes based on observable reading variables. And then after this initial pricing, at each renewal, when we accumulate the claim history for each policyholder, we can certainly adjust the premium based on the policyholder's claim history. The underlying assumption is the risk classification is not perfect, right? So we can use the claim history to better refine the classification system, right? And this process is known as experience rating, right? So that's the, roughly speaking, the high-level summary about the pricing framework I have in mind. And here in this context, we're talking about the climate risk, which everyone believes is important and has a significant impact on the industry. So in this task, I guess this is certainly climate related, but typically when we talk about the climate risk, I guess everyone have in mind is mostly about like the catastrophic event, right? When you think about the hurricane or the flood, right? But here, in contrast, in this project, we're actually thinking not only this kind of big impact event. What we have in mind is actually not only the climate factors or weather risks affect this cat event, but it also affects the ordinary insurance claims, right? So in this specific context of automobile insurance example, where we do have access to the data so that we can illustrate our method. This is how we argue the channels through which the weather information could affect the realized risk of policyholder, right? I guess the first channel is, it's really, I hope you'll find it intuitive to find that if you think about the weather conditions, right, whether there's a heavy rain, whether the road is slippery, maybe because of the snow, certainly affects the risk or the likelihood of events, right? This is one channel. You think about this as a direct impact of weather conditions on the risk outcome. But the second channel is we also think that the weather information or weather conditions also affect the policyholder's driving behavior, certainly in this context of automobile insurance. So specifically, you want to think about that. I assume most of us, when we go on vacation or go to work, we check weather forecasts, right? So maybe if I see this is a huge storm coming in later today, I might just stay at home and work remotely, right? This is one example I can think of. So basically, there's also a literature studying how the weather forecast affects the policyholder's behavior, right? So this is the second channel where we think the weather conditions indirectly has an impact on the realized risk outcome for each policyholder. So based on this background, but in practice, however, we're not aware of any insurance company explicitly incorporate these weather conditions into their product design or pricing methods. But I guess instead you want to probably, you can argue some of these is currently done through maybe an implicit way, in that if you want to think about a lot of insurers use territories as a rating vector, then you can probably argue these territories works as an approximate or proxy for the underlying weather conditions, right? But here, our goal, or what we're trying to do, is to see whether we can directly or implicitly incorporate the measured or the weather conditions that we can easily measure into this pricing framework, into the product design. And at the same time, we also want to maintain the interpretability of the classic actuarial model. That's the sort of goal we have in mind when we started on this project. Sorry. Okay. So as I mentioned earlier, so this is the goal for our project, right? We want to develop a framework that allows us to incorporate weather information into rate making. So I want to give you a high-level overview about our approach. Later you will see, I won't get into the technical details. So the approach we take is a varying coefficient framework. This is, as you will see, this is a very strict framework where we build on the classic actuarial loss model, and then incorporate the weather information by allowing the premium relativity to be a function or to vary by the weather conditions. But in practice, when we price the risks for the future coverage, you will be aware that there's a kind of information mismatch issue in that the information regarding the future weather condition is not observed yet at the time of the pricing, right? So that motivates this second piece, this auxiliary learning framework, where we try to make an adjustment so that we can make sort of forward-looking decision-making. So that's a high-level summary. I'll get into the detail now. So this is the setting we're considering. Think about a portfolio of policyholders. And then for all these policyholders are followed over time. So you observe these policyholders over time, right? The outcome variable we focus on here that we use to measure the risk in the context of automobile insurance is the number of claims by each policyholder. And on top of that, we have access to a set of rating variables. In this context, you want to think about policyholder and maybe automobile characteristics. Now, the framework we consider is quite standard. If you're, I guess, academic actually working in the non-life insurance field, or you're pricing actuary, you might know this classic Poisson gamma model. So basically speaking, we're using the Poisson distribution to describe the number of claims from each policyholder. And then for the purpose of experience rating, we're assuming there's a latent factor there denoted by this latent factor theta, which we can update through the policyholder's claim history, right? That's the mechanism of experience rating. But the important part here is there are sort of two types of heterogeneity across the policyholders. Part of the heterogeneity is observed or is explained by the policyholder, by the observable information, right? That's the predictors here we have. And in this classic setting, basically, we normally will assume this Poisson parameter in log scale follow this linear combination, right? In the actual literature, people call this generalized linear models. And the next thing here is you have a very nice interpretation for this regression coefficient. This is directly related to the premium relativity that the practitioner used setting up the premium. So we adopt this framework just because of the simplicity and also the interpretability of this regression coefficient. Now, next, I want to explain this is how we think about the problem, right? So here you're looking at a typical policyholder, right? That comes into the pool of the insurer's risk at this time TS, right? So at the initial underwriting stage, the insurer doesn't have the information regarding the policyholder's claim history. So at that initial underwriting stage, you price based on the observed policyholder characteristic. But what do we argue here? We're trying to incorporate the weather information. So that's why what we're thinking is at the time of pricing, in addition to the policyholder or vehicle characteristics, we also actually observe the historical weather measurements, right? So that's the sort of information we are trying to incorporate. And we decided we're going to use the historical weather information over T-year period. Oh, sorry, over H-year period, right? But things change every time when the contract is renewed, right? When the contract is renewed, the insurer does not have access to these weather information or reading variables, but you also have the claim history, which you use to update the premium, right? That's the sort of timeline we're having in mind when we develop this framework. Okay, now this is very straightforward. What we're trying to modify, the classic model, is following the same framework, but we're saying now the relativity, that's the regression coefficient, is not constant anymore. Instead, the relativity will depend on the weather condition during which the driver typically drive their cars around, right? So here, notation sounds complicated, but the key idea here is we allow the regression coefficient to be a smooth function of these weather measurements. Okay. Now, to implement this is a standard model. It's straightforward to implement, but the practical issue is at the time of the pricing, you determine the price for the coverage in the future period, right? So in principle, the weather condition that affects the realized risk outcome in this coverage period should describe the weather conditions in this future period, right? So that means at the time of the pricing, what you only observe as an insurer is the historical weather information, right? So there's this mismatch problem. To solve this issue, what we're trying to do is what we decided to do is we introduced this auxiliary learning framework. Essentially, what we're doing here is we're trying to generate representation for future weather conditions using the historical weather conditions, right? And this is done through this auxiliary learning task. And we're training this model simultaneously by combining the classic actual modeling framework and this weather representation learning framework together. Okay, that's the sort of the key. You don't need to look into detail here. There are too much, but this highlights the framework, right? The top part basically shows we have an encoder-decoder structure that allows us to incorporate this weather information, right? And the output of this goes into this classic pricing model, right? But the bottom part basically shows that at the same time of the learning, we also need to learn a representation of future weather conditions. I decided to show this because I thought this is a nice picture. And also this is generated certainly by the assistant of AI. Early this morning, we all talk about the risk of AI, but I guess personally, I like it. I like the idea of embracing and leverage AI to help us in whatever ways. Okay, now let me briefly describe the two sources of data, and then I'll show you the key results. Right? I'll also should be mindful of time. Two sources of data. So one source of the data is the longitudinal data set from the Chinese insurance company, where we do collect the information at the policyholder level. So we observe the policyholder information, the kind of what kind of car you drive, the characteristics for these cars, and they realize the risk outcomes. That's the number of claims in each year. Then we supplement this with spatial temporal. In fact, the time series of meteorological variables that we use to describe the weather conditions. I'm going to skip some of these. This is the summary statistics for the number of accidents. So as you see, most of the policyholders don't have accidents over the year. But surprisingly, this likelihood of having car accident in China is surprisingly large. At least in my experience, I worked with data in different continents, but this is extremely large, I would say, over 20%. In US, I would say it's about 5%. Okay. I'm going to skip these two tables that summarize the policyholder, the vehicle characteristics. Right? So this is how we collect the meteorological variables. So these variables are collected through these weather conditions in China. So this figure shows you the map of Shandong province. This is just one province in China, and there are several weather stations spread out the province that collects this weather information. The weather information is collected through a time series observation. So basically, we observe the daily measurements over several years. I'm going to skip this and this. I'll briefly comment on this. So what we did here is we're trying to prove a concept. Basically, we want to show this could help in some ways. We did two types of analysis. This one type of analysis is basically a statistical evidence that our model kind of help improve the prediction accuracy, which which actually might not be interested by the insurer, but this is the sort of the key thing we'll try to emphasize. What are the key implications by incorporating this weather information? So we're trying to argue that that now with this information incorporated in the relativity, then this changed the underlying assumption of the premium relativity. In the classic setting, we basically assume the premium relativity is constant across policyholders within the homogeneous risk class, right? But this is saying even within the same risk class where you used to charge the same premium for all these individual policyholders, we're showing that the relativity now varies by policyholders through the weather conditions under which the policyholder operate their vehicle, right? That's the key implication. And then we're also did a sort of comparison between our proposed premium versus the premium the insurance company currently charge. So this two leaves curve basically shows, the left panel shows that our approach where you see the better match between the loss curve and the premium curve compared to the current premium used by the insurance company, and also the proposed premium kind of exhibit a sharper slope, indicating this is a better separation between the low risk and high risk. Right? I want to quickly conclude here. I think just to quick summary is what we had in mind is just to try to incorporate this weather information directly into the product design. And we did this through a varying coefficient model where we believe it maintains the interpretability and consistent with the current actual practice. Okay. I want to point out lastly that this is a very preliminary results. This is the first time we present this in public. We don't have a working paper yet, but we welcome the comments and any thoughts. Certainly talk to me afterwards. Yep. I'll stop here. Thank you so much for your attention.
This is a recent project on the assessment of the driving risk using telematic data. And it is a joint work with my colleague, Andre Badescu, who is in the audience, and also our PhD student, Jungtae Lee. And Jungtae is the main contributor to the project, and who happened to be a Korean. Jungtae, could you stand up? Okay. Okay, so here is the outline of the talk. So I will begin with some background about how this project started. Okay? Then I'm going to talk about the challenges and in the modeling and the analysis of the data. Okay? Then I'm going to present our approach, as I mentioned. This is the idea from Jungtae, okay? And the approach to quantify the driving risk. Then if I have time, I'm going to talk about the ongoing project, okay? So this is a project of a larger project. Okay, so the project was done from multiple years of collaboration between us, Andre and I and our PhD students, and Joel Tapp, a global leader in telematic data collection and management. And we have been training their interns for several years. And here are some projects we have been supervising. Okay, you can see from the title of these projects, you can see that all these projects are centered at the evaluation and the classification of the driving risk, both at the trip level and the driver's level, okay? And also in a very data-driven way. I just want to mention that actually our currently research focus is to provide a solution to the problems closely related to the industry, and hopefully our work can have an immediate impact on insurance, and this is one of them. Okay, also clearly, driving risk is very important to auto insurance. Okay? So you can see if you want to price auto insurance policy accurately, you really need to quantify the driving risk. Okay? And the current approach for pricing the driving risk is the following. For pricing the insurance is the following. So basically, we try to risk classify or risk differentiation. Then we rank and quantify for the pricing purposes. Okay. Now, if you understand the telematic data, which is the data collected from a telematic device for the driving behavior, right? So you can see the data we collect is a time series data, which provide very rich behavior information of drivers, okay, at the trip level. And so current research is the following. The most research uses drivers' attributes, gender, age, race, or car type, fuel type, and so on, right? And also summary statistics of trips. For example, how many miles the driver drive each month or each year, and at a certain threshold, the acceleration about certain threshold, how many times, okay, how frequent, and so on. Then they use a regression framework, modeling framework, okay, to use these variables. Okay. But such an approach clearly has issues, right? So you can see it doesn't fully utilize the rich behavior information embedded in the telematic data. Okay? And also the summary statistics are very sensitive to how they are calculated and how often. Okay? So it's a problematic, right? When the trip length and the scale of the event count from trip to trip and from the driver to driver varies. Okay? And a very small change can have a very significant effect on a regression model. So as a result, the quantification of the driving risk becomes very challenging. Okay, so here is some idea to show you the driving risk. Okay, so here we have 3 different driving behavior. The top one is a normal driving behavior. Here we talk about acceleration. Okay, the middle one is talked about the drowsy driving behavior. People sleep behind the wheel. Okay, and the bottom one is aggressive driving behavior. So the driver constantly deaccelerate or braking, right? So in this case, so you can see here, the time series data looks pretty normal. Okay, So you can see on the top, the time series data looks pretty normal in terms of acceleration, longitudinal acceleration. And the middle one, the middle panel, you can see, because the person sleeps behind the wheel, when suddenly he or she wake up and see something happen, he or she will brake very hard. So you can see, right, the downwards. Okay. Then for aggressive, it happens more often, but less severe. Okay, less severe. You can see here. So now we have 3 different driving behavior, and the bottom 2 are very risky. And sometimes the drowsy driving behavior is more risky, more dangerous than the aggressive, because at least when someone drives aggressively, he or she is fully awake, so know what's happening, right? But if someone sleeps behind the wheel, he doesn't know. So, okay, so very dangerous. Okay, so how do we identify the driving risky or dangerous driving behavior? Okay, and here is our approach. Okay, so we first collect the telematic data, so we have 3 panels to summarize our approach at a high level. So on the left panel, you can see, so we first collect high frequency telematic signals or data, okay? Then we decompose the signal into multiple levels at a different time scale, okay? So decompose. Now use that, then we aggregate, then we use that to use a severity model to model the severity of the acceleration or deacceleration. So using a mixture model here. In the middle part is the center part presents the normal driving behavior. The tail part left represents the harsh braking or harsh deacceleration, and the right part the right tail part represents aggressive acceleration or aggressive, okay? Okay, so once we do that, then we can come up with a risk index to measure how risky or how dangerous the driving behavior, okay? So in this case, if it's a normal driving behavior, the index value of the index is low. If the driver drives dangerously, then the index goes up, okay? Then if the driver drive normally again, the index goes down and so on. Aggressive, go up, okay? Then we can also use the index with a credibility model to update the index sequentially, okay? So that's the idea here, okay? And here is a little bit more detail, okay? So as we know, the time series data, the telematic signals are time series data, okay? And so the relevant behavior are hash breaking, hash acceleration, a short burst of acceleration, right? And also the sustained of normal maneuvers, okay? And all these behavior are local, okay, in time. Okay? And also can be occur at different durations, okay? So because of that, the wavelets are attractive, are a good tool to model this behavior, to recognize the patterns, okay? And the short-lived local deviation is presented at the final time scale, and the longer sustained patterns is represented at the closer time square, okay? Will be more detail in the few slides, okay? So that's why we choose the wavelet representation to analyze the telematic data, right? Okay, so here is a little bit of technical details. Suppose you have the signal, okay? The top is the telematic signals, okay? So in this case, we decompose the signal into multiple levels, usually 6 levels in practice, okay? And for each level, there is a wavelet representation, okay? Wavelet representation, okay? Okay? And so the interpretation is very simple. Lower level, okay, probably I will just say this. Let me see. Okay, okay. Lower level represents the short duration local changes. Large level, higher level represents smoother, longer duration changes. And as I just mentioned, 6 levels in practice is enough because it can capture more than 90% of the patterns, okay? Sorry. Okay, so after we after decomposition, so then we aggregate, we identify the severity, high severity of the telematic signal. Okay, so we aggregate the coefficients across selected levels. As I said, 6 levels. Okay, so in this case, the resulting data is a single triple level time series data. Okay, single time series data. So with the data we collect after aggregation, then we do some technical, we try to reduce the temporal dependence, okay, by doing some sampling and also thinning technique, okay, apply thinning technique to each of the chips, okay. So in this case, we have a fairly nice, I would say, independent sample. So we use this sample to fit a mixture model. Okay, so So idea is here is very simple. Why would we use a mixture model? The idea is a mixture model represents all the driving behavior. As I just mentioned, the middle one represents the normal behavior. The tail parts represent the dangerous behavior. Okay, and so here is. Okay, so now, sorry. Okay, so basically we use a Gaussian uniform mixture model. So this is a very technical, you don't need to know. And once we use a model, we can use some fitting algorithm, okay? All right. So once we have the model, then we recount how many data point at each level in each the components, each layer. So if you understand the mixture level, so in this case, each mixture level contains multiple components, right? So now we count how many. So in this case, we count how often the signal enter each layer, okay? Each layer, okay? So in this case, a trip is summarized not only by how many abnormal behavior pattern occur, but also how deep, because we have multiple layers. As I mentioned, the layer on the left represents the hash breaking at a different level, and on the right represents the hash acceleration at a different level. So, okay. And then we count how many coefficients in each layer, and then we model these counts using a Poisson gamma model. I think Professor Shi just used the model for different purposes, okay? So in this, the reason is very similar. The reason we use a Poisson gamma because the model can be sequentially updated, okay? So, okay? And also can incorporate the exposure, meaning the trip level, and the length of the trip, okay? I try to make, I want to be very mindful about my time because it's late. Okay, so now I want to represent a control study to show you the approach we propose really works. Okay, really works. So here we have data coming from this paper. Okay, so in this paper, the authors asked 5 different drivers to drive the vehicle in 3 different manners, okay? Normal, drowsy, and aggressive, okay? So then the telematic device record from the start to the beginning, cover everything, right? So this is actually the label data, but it is control data. It's not simulated data, okay? It's a control data. The problem with the telematic data analysis is that we really don't have a very good real data, okay? So, okay? And that's why, I mean, we use this data, but we're currently working with the Geotap, the company, to acquire their collision data for this project. Okay, so now we, as I just mentioned, and so we now fit the severity and frequency component using all the 40 trips we collect from the control study, okay? So here is the fitting, okay? So after that, so because now we have a mixture model, we have a mixture model, right? So Gaussian uniform mixture, right? So in this case, if you understand the mixture model, we have M components now, okay, N components, okay? So now we count how many, or M layers, right? So we count how many coefficients or telematic signals from all the levels is in the layer, okay, in the layer, okay? Then we use the Poisson gamma to calculate posterior index, intensity, posterior intensity, okay? So the formula It's very standard if you understand the credibility theory, European credibility theory. So this is very standard, right? Okay. Then at the end, we have this formula for the risk index. It's a weighted average of the intensity from each layer. Okay, each layer. Okay. So, and the coefficient, just want to mention the coefficient, this is a weighted average, okay? For the farther away, the layer farther away, we assign higher weight, okay, to emphasize the severity of the driving behavior, okay? Okay, and here is the numerical result, which show our approach works quite well, okay? So you can see we have 6 drivers, as I mentioned, okay, from the control study, okay? So each driver asked to drive in highway and the secondary road, okay? And in 3 behavior, normal, aggressive, and drowsy, okay? So you can see here. So we have exposure, you don't need to know the exact the number, but what important is for each trip, we use the index, risk index to calculate, okay? We calculate risk index for each trip. For a normal one, you can see for driver 1, it's a 3.47. For the aggressive driving, aggressive trip, the index is 15.64. You can see much higher now. And for another normal driving in the secondary highway, another driving is a 5.442. Then the drowsy one is a 14.86, okay? And all these numbers show that we can really separate the normal driving from the aggressive driving, not only aggressive driving, but also drowsy driving. And as I want to mention that drowsy driving is really difficult to identify. And this approach really works for the drowsy driving. Aggressive driving, okay. We kind of know, right? If someone drive very fast, accelerate a lot, and decelerate a lot, you know it's dangerous. But for drowsy, it looks normal, but it's not normal, right? So you can see, we can identify, and we also can identify each driver by update the trip, okay? So you can see here on the top, okay, the first trip is normal, the index value is 3.47. Then the person drive aggressively. Now, combine these 2 trips, the index should goes up, right? So it goes up to 9.49. Now, because in the third trip, the driver drive normally, the index drop a little bit. But this index taking account of all 3 trips, right? Then after another dangerous driving, drowsy driving, then index goes up again. So you can see we can update the driver's risk index by looking at how many trips the person has done in the past, okay? Oh, no time. Okay, so anyway, so in this case, we can really, my point is we can really separate dangerous driving from normal driving using this technology, okay? Right. Okay, now the last second slide just show you actually, we not only can separate from the 40 trips, we also conducted the one left out validation to show it really works. Okay, so for each one, for 6 drivers, we take 1 out, then use the remaining to fit the model, then use the model, use the index, then use the model, then calculate the index for the 1 left out. Okay, so you can see, I want you to pay attention to the second panel here. So if the driving is normal, it should be for the validation, for the binary validation, okay, it should be under the -9, 50%, basically 0.5. If it's a dangerous driving, this is the probability of risky driving, okay? it should be above. Now you can see there's a clear separation. So that means our approach really works, okay? Okay, so let me wrap this up. Maybe I should skip the ongoing project, okay? Just wrap this up, and then because I don't want to go over too much time. So the approach is fully signal-driven. No clean label, we don't need to. No vehicle covariance, okay? And it contributes three things simultaneously. We have a time series representation that preserves local driving dynamic. There's a formal notion of severity anchored by at the portfolio level, okay? And we have a dynamic trip to driver updating mechanic, okay? So maybe just a few words about the ongoing. So now we are moving to multivariate because we want to include other variables. We want to include, currently we only use longitudinal acceleration. And in the future, we want to include the lane change, hash cornering, the lateral acceleration basically, okay, and other things, okay. And also we want to move from the pattern to event because a pattern can be clustered together. Two patterns may represent the same event, so we want to move. So we want to do a motive discovery, and if we can do that successfully, I think we can use a functional regression model for pricing. Okay, so that's our idea. I think I stop here. And here, if you are interested in our project, this is a paper you can download from our website, and here's a QR code. Okay, thank you very much.
Good afternoon, everyone. This is Runhuan Feng from Tsinghua University. And in fact, the university I'm in right now has a lot of ties to Korea. And a lot of research collaborations with Korean institutions. And in fact, we recently had a very, very famous Korean alumni, Mr. Kim Myung-sung. Do you know him? No? I must have pronounced the name not correctly. He's the current prime minister of Korea. Kim Myung-sung? Kim Myung-sung? Okay. Right. Yeah, so he actually visited the university just a week ago. And so there was a lot of celebration on campus. Anyway, what I will talk about today is basically some of the theory we've been developing over the last few years based on the practices on the DeFi, decentralized insurance industry. And so I wanted to give an introductory talk here. There's no math, no formula at all, and I hope this might be interesting to both practitioners and academics. All right, so I will talk about why there's so much innovation going on in the DeFi space, and what are they, and how do they work? Okay, just very simple question to be answered today. The insurance industry we have today, there are lots of challenges, at least for newcomers, right? The capital requirements for insurance is typically very, very high, right? And if you look at the insurance markets around the world, it is highly concentrated, right? Take China, for example. The top 5 insurers in China, they would account for 60% in the life insurance market and 70% in the property and casualty insurance market. And I just asked AI before I come up, and the story is the same in Korea, right? There are over 230 insurers in China, right? So if the top 5 get 70%, as you see, and the rest of them just running at the very thin margin, okay? So it's very, very concentrated, and there's very stringent regulatory oversight, right? There's the Solvency II in Europe, RBC in the U.S. and C-Cross in China. I'm sure there's similar requirements in Korea. So it's very hard to comply. It's very costly to comply with the regulations. I actually sit on the board of directors for one of the medium-sized insurers. I would argue maybe 90% of the time of the board meeting is focused on meeting the requirements, right? The regulator give us grades. We have, there's so many problems, and then we have to work to meet their expectations. So that's an existing issue. Also, is because of the products, the nature of the products, insurance products, there's a very high brand reputation barrier for newcomers, right? If you buy a life insurance product that would last for 20 years, right, you wonder whether the insurer will still be there, right, when you grow old, when you need the money, right? So this is also a very challenging issue for newcomers. And also the acquisition cost is very high, okay, to get new customers. That's why it is very difficult to disrupt the industry. I spoke to a lot of the insurer tech companies in the country. They always start with a giant ambition, right? They want to use technology to disrupt the industry, but at the end, they often become just simply a distributor of the main insurers. They really couldn't. Even today, right? We talk about internet-based insurance, but if you look at the business model, it's almost the same, identical to the old model with high commission. Right? Instead of spending, so you would think that they can acquire a lot of customers through online advertisement, but then they spend a lot of money to actually get the agents to bring this customer to online to buy this customers. So they have exactly the same model as before, even though on surface we introduced a lot of innovations. But this problem is not new. It has been studied well in economics, right? There's a very famous theory in the 90s by some Harvard professors on disruptive innovations. There are 2 types of innovations that are most common to disrupt the industry, and one of them is low end, right? As a newcomer, you do not actually necessarily be able to provide the most advanced technology or better services, right? In fact, if you look at the most successful startups from Tsinghua, a lot of them, you would imagine, is usually who hold the best patents, the best technology would survive. But if you look at the statistics, it's not the case, okay? It is, a lot of them actually come from the alumni of our school, the School of Economics and Management, right? Business school students, they do not have the engineering advances, but they can build better models, right? And a lot of the new disruptors, they focus in areas that are low profit for the traditional the players, right? Because the main players, they really don't care to look into the small areas with very little profit margin, right? So that's how they survive. And also, if you really can't compete with major insurers in a particular area, then you try to go look for new areas, right? Find a new track for yourself, right? So this is the new market disruption, right? Examples of this would be, for example, TikTok, right? TikTok, at the beginning, they have no competition with YouTube, right? But then they find out, there are people who are looking for shorter video clips, right? So they find a market for themselves. An example of the low-end disruption would be Netflix, for example, right? I went to Canada for grad school in early 2000s, and then Blockbuster was the main players, right? And then you rent the video, you have to go to a physical store, rent the video, and then they provided, Netflix provided a new model, right? You can rent a DVD by mail, right? Nobody paid much attention to that until 10 years later, Blockbuster went bankrupt, and then Newflex is the new business model, right? So this is how they got started. So what I want to talk about today is an innovation of insurance in a completely different market, right, in DeFi. I would argue even today, it is still at very early experimental stage, right? It's gonna, like any other business, it's gonna follow the Darwinian, theory of evolution. Right? There's many different models, and many of them will fail. In fact, some of the models I talk about today may fail, but you need this kind of innovation to build up over time, and then it will eventually will become a disruptor in the market. Okay, so I'll show you some of the disruptors today. So I did a lot of work in the last few years on this, and I meant this to be introductory. So I even wrote a book about the decentralized insurance that talks about many different business models being developed across around the world. So if you're interested in this, you can read this book. I will talk about today. I'll give a little introduction about the DeFi insurance. This I would argue is the new market disruption. They focus on providing insurance for digital assets. Okay. And I also happen to have two talks. We didn't actually plan this, but turns out when I prepared my notes earlier, I found out that the other two talks we have at the IME conference also relate to this. So my student, who actually couldn't be here at this conference, will plan to talk about this disrupted insurance, but I will be his substitute, so you will see me again on day one. So distributed insurance is different from DeFi. Where DeFi is a bit like traditional insurance, but then the subject, right, the coverage is digital assets. Okay, it's a bit like cyber insurance. Okay, distributed insurance is a different idea, right? So the capital provided for this insurance is going to be provided by investors. So it's a bit like a peer-to-peer network in which they match the policyholders with underwriters who are investors around the world. So there's a matchmaking going on for this distribution of the risks in the network. Okay, so that's a different topic. And also at this Congress, we'll talk about decentralized claim process, right? In the traditional insurance, claims are processed by professionals, professional claims appraisers, right? But in the decentralized, in DeFi world, there's no such people. So then they have to find a way to decentralize the decision making across a group of individuals, right? And this idea is very common in all DeFi applications, right? And so we actually studied this because this is a bit of a study. This has been studied. The voting process has been studied in political science literature, right? So we're trying to compare the results from political science literature with the new decentralized voting, decentralized decision making from this new model. Okay, we'll talk about that on Wednesday. Okay, so very quickly, in the DeFi world, instead of relying on traditional financial institutions, the idea is to replace them with blockchain protocols. Okay, so a lot of the processes we're talking about for lending, for insurance will be replaced by smart contracts. Okay, and by doing so, you have to automate a lot of the traditional methods. So the most common approach is to make the decision through a community of token holders. Okay. For example, for the underwriting, for claims process, right? In the traditional insurance, this is done by some professionals, right? If there's a car accident, you send a appraiser there to look at the accidents and judge how much payments to make. But in the decentralized world, you would have a group of people with incentives to do so. They stake their coins, right? And then you distribute their premiums to them as rewards. And in return, they have to provide the service by participating in the voting process, whether or not to deny the claim. Okay, so this is a very common, not just in insurance, but also in lending and in other types of policies. Now, what I want to talk a little bit about is the risk sharing. I think risk sharing is the main components of the insurance business, right? When you offer insurance contracts, you are taking on risks from your policyholders, right? And then in the centralized, in the traditional insurance model, the insurer has to carry all the risks, right? But then they do so by the law of large number. They can reduce the variance of the aggregate risks. They can better manage to make the risk more manageable. But in the DeFi world, because there's no traditional insurer, so this risk has to be managed by a community of risk assessors, right, or token holders. So most of the model that we're looking, in fact, all the model we've looked so far, right, whether it's traditional or in the DeFi world or any other insurance-related applications, we realize that they can be summarized in this, what we call the spatial temporal risk sharing. Okay? Now, the risks has to be exchanged among participants in some way, right? Whether it's through DeFi or other approaches. And then the policyholders typically retain some risks by deductibles or policy limits. And then the risk that cannot be shared among participants or investors, they would have to be transferred to the capital market, right? So this is where the insurance-linked security takes place, right? So we actually have a paper to look at how this is done in traditional insurance. Now, if this cannot be absorbed in a single period, then the risk will be transferred to other periods, right? This is very common in catastrophe insurance, right? When you cannot absorb all the risks, if it happens rarely, and when it happens, it is very high severity, then the risk has to be transferred over time. Okay, but this is a very general framework. Then we worked on DeFi insurance. We try to understand better how that fits into the framework of spatial temporal risk sharing. So let me give you one example. All right, so this is an example of Nexus Mutual. Nexus Mutual is the largest DeFi insurers in the DeFi market. By the way, I mean, this is very ironic. In the DeFi world, the largest insurer, which is Nexus Mutual, they account for 90% of the market already. Right? It's even worse than the more traditional centralized insurance market. So I think there is a problem. Right? There is a problem. But this has to be addressed by the industry over time. Right? It is too centralized. Right? And it's ironic to call it a DeFi, a decentralized finance. Okay, so in this model, it's done typically in this way. So you have a group of risk assessors, each of whom brings in some capital, right? And then they turn it into some tokens, right? Some called Nexus Mutual. And then they stake their tokens, right? This acts a bit like a collateral, all right? And then they form the risk pool, the capital pool for the insurance, right? So when they sell these products to holders of crypto assets, right? For example, you deposit your assets in some a sushi swap in some protocols, you want protection, right? And this is like cyber insurance that we talked about earlier. Right? If there's a hacker, right, that attack the platform and you lose access to your crypto assets, then the insurer, the Nexus Mutual, will provide coverage, provide compensation for 90% of the assets lost in your protocol. All right. So if you buy that product, the premium will be allocated to all token holders, to all risk assessors, in proportion to their stakes. Okay. Okay. For example, if you stake 10%, right, then you get 10% of the premium, right? Okay. All right, so then that gives you incentive to participate. But then you have to also perform due diligence for the smart contract, right? Because if you don't do it well, right, if a claim happens, then your tokens will be burned, right? It will be used to pay claims, right? So you're essentially undertaking some risks from this digital assets, right? From the cyber attacks on these digital assets. So that gives you a reason to actually do a good job in investigating these contracts, right? So these are the first layer of this DeFi insurance model. Okay, so the risks are essentially distributed among all the participants, all the risk assessors in that layer. Okay, but then now this is where different models, different business model vary across the industry. Some of them have a second layer. Okay, if the risk cannot be absorbed entirely in this pool created by the risk assessor, then they have the second layer. The surplus, some portion of the premium will be used to build the second layer, and that is there to essentially to absorb the excessive losses from the first layer. Okay, and that if there's a surplus, then it's going to be carried over time. Right. So that second layer essentially it is a spatial risk transfer, a bit like catastrophe insurance. Right, building up this reserve for the future. Okay. And then the third layer, a lot of the protocols actually have the third layer, which consists of, which is the funding is provided by the investors. So these are the token holders that do not participate in the risk assessment. Okay, they put in the funding. If there is a surplus in the risk pool, right, the investment return will be provided to the investors as the investment returns. Okay, will be given to. So that's in the third layer. So you will see that there are about 30 different protocols in the DeFi world at the moment. Right? So we wanted to look at which one is better. Is Nexus Mutual actually hold the key to the success? Right. So we look at all of them. And it turns out this is actually not different so much different from the spatial temporal risk framework, right? Essentially, you just got different practices, but the idea is actually very similar. So actually, you can map them one-to-one to the spatial temporal risk sharing. Okay, so in the last few minutes, let me just show you. What we find out is that because there are different combinations of the structure, right? Some has the first layer, the Nexus Mutual is a model with the first and third layer, okay? There's another product called Insurance that consists of the layer 1, 2, and 3, okay? So we want to compare them. So we run some simulations, we built a model for this, and try to compare these different models by their expected return, the Sharpe ratio on their returns, and the ruin probability. We look at over the 30 periods, how likely the funding provided by the investors would actually go bankrupt. Okay, and as you can see from the model, so in the panel A, this is the case where it's no profit loading, right? So the expected income is equal to expected outgo for each layer. So we set up the premium in this way, and there's no investment. Okay. There's no investment because, in fact, in a lot of these models, they don't even have the second layer, right? There's no carryover of funding, so there's no need to talk about investment return, right? Okay, so if it's in that case, you can see that in terms of the returns, it doesn't make sense actually to build the second layer. If you look at the second layer in the line of L1, 2, 3, that's the model with the second layer with the temporal risk sharing. Then you see the return on this type of model is actually much lower. It's lower than the ones in which you actually build. I'm sorry. Yeah. The one with the spatial risk sharing actually has a lower return than the ones without. Okay, and they actually are not doing much better in any of the 3 metrics or 4 metrics we introduced. They would only be doing better if you look at the second panel or third panel when we introduce financial returns, and also we look at some profit loading for each layer. And especially in the third layer, we looked at you have to give it enough time to build up the reserve. So if you run the simulation after 30 periods, then they start to make a difference. Right? You can see that after 30 periods of running, then you would see that the financial return on this model would actually be much higher than their counterparts without the second layer. So what this tells us is that most protocols that have been developed in the DeFi market are very the engineers behind it are very short-sighted. Okay, they're looking for high returns, so they built the model without much buffer zone. Okay, and then if you're looking for long-term success, it's very critical, right? Especially for these cyber risks, with high uncertainty at the moment, right? A lot of the new protocols have not stood to time, so it's very high uncertainty. So from a design viewpoint, it's actually better to use some of the ideas, this reserving ideas from the more traditional insurance market, right? So we actually run the simulations for different models. So we listed the 6 top business models developed in the DeFi market, and we want to look at how they perform, how they actually generate returns for the investors. Oh, by the way, if you look for the financial returns for the investors, so they would all appear in L3. L3 is where the investors sit. So you would look at that column for the financial returns, and then if you're looking for long-term prosperity, long-term survival of these business models, then you can see that, in fact, some of the models, Bridge Mutual, for example, in general, they perform better. And then some of the newer models, for example, if you DeFi insured, they have a very relatively high ruin probability. Right? I think this is very interesting for academics to look into how this business model perform, and most of the I have to point out most of the engineers and designers of these models are not from the traditional insurance business. Okay, and then they did it mostly from an investment viewpoint. So I think there are a lot of the existing issues with models. So I don't know if I come here again in 5 years, I don't know if many of them will still be there. But I think it's critical that for the industry to look into, to examine how their models would survive over long term. And I think building these models would actually help them help these practitioners understand better how to generate or construct models that would support the industry. The industry at the moment, the insurance industry within the DeFi market is actually very, very small. Right? Used to be, I think they would actually rank top 10 when I first looked at this 3 years ago. But now I think they can hardly make it to the top 20. So it's very, very minimum. And most of the investors in the market are probably very speculative and not really buying a lot of insurance in the market at the moment. So, but I do think there's a long way to go, and it's very important I think it's also important for us academics to look into this. And maybe, who knows, in 10 or 20 years, right, this should become a useful model for traditional insurers, and one of them may become a disruptor in the market. Okay, so that's all I want to talk about. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thanks very much. It's my pleasure to be here and to somewhat close this meeting, and I kind of stand in between this meeting and the drinks. So today I'm going to present some concepts that we've been working on pricing in weather index insurance. So this is joint work with my PhD student, Chuan Zichao, and Li Wenyuan, who is my colleague at HKU. Just after Runhuan Feng, I looked up famous Korean alumni at HKU. We have plenty. I don't think I can beat this particular example. Of course, we have a well-known previous Korean colleague from HKU in the field, but just as a side note. Anyhow, so what am I going to talk about? So I want to present to you some concepts, and I will propose a numerical method and implement that in the realm of weather risks and index insurance. So we study here agricultural vulnerability, weather-based risks that are severely threatening agricultural livelihoods and the socioeconomic stability of rural communities, and the obvious traditional insurance approach would be to indemnify such losses. However, particular for agricultural losses, there are a lot of economic problems or administrative costs. Think about moral hazards. It's hard to justify your losses. It's hard to measure the losses in a credible way towards the insurer, or indemnity insurance can just be very expensive. So instead, what we want to do is we want to see how can we somewhat replicate such indemnity losses the best we can using indices that are measurable, that are somewhat undisputable, and therefore are easy to check. And this then gives rise to so-called index insurance. And the core challenge here is to design a contract so to somewhat hedge the risk the best we can. And in particular, we focus here on the pricing. So we look here in a sequential game how in a monopoly such insurance could be priced. Of course, at the moment, in agricultural insurance, index insurance products are rare. So we want to study if one insurer touches the water, what would be a reasonable or good way to price this risk. And this essentially is a monopoly. I'm not claiming here monopolies are economically efficient or good, but at least it gives some benchmark on what can be obtained. So, so we design here a sequential game where, in a way, the insurer is pricing and the farmer has a particular demand, right? So you price anticipating what the demand will be in return to the prices. And for the design of the index insurance contract, we study here various forms of neural networks and do validation on the optimal design. For the pricing, we want to study different concepts, so we propose 3 different ways to price them, ranking from very simple towards very complex. So how many parameters are you want to optimize over? In particular, of course, if you make your pricing very complex, this essentially gives you a lot of parameters to optimize over. So there is a trade-off in between numerical complexity and, let's say, the best way to price. Okay, and we solve this using bi-level programming and show or provide an algorithm and show that the algorithm converges and performs well and is in a way more efficient than when you would solve this problem using 2 sequential steps. So essentially the monopoly pricing part already dates back from the 80s and has actually been kind of reevaluated and revived in the last 5 to 10 years. And we contribute to that, but in particular what we contribute is that instead of focusing on indemnity insurance, we focus on index insurance. Okay. What is particularly the case with any kind of agricultural products is that if you want to study the relationship between the losses and the indices, those relationships are typically nonlinear. So to give you an example, think about crop losses. They can be very high when there is no precipitation or loads of precipitation, right? Or if temperature very high, very low, there can be larger insurable losses. So the kind of traditional linear or GLM type approach here may fail, and that is where neural networks can help to essentially establish such complex, nonlinear or non-monotone relations. And in a way, what you give up is somewhat interpretation, and I'm fully on board with such criticism. However, it is kind of an overly optimized approach that is somewhat ideal. I think in practice, the more parametric approaches that are depending on, let's say, finitely many parameters or structures are usually easier to implement. But again, we want to provide somewhat a overly optimized, ideal approach. Okay. So what is the problem? So I skipped some of the technical details, but roughly we have here this sequential problem, right? So we have a kind of a classical monopoly pricing problem from the perspective of the insurer, which is called the upper problem, in which the insurer maximizes expected profit, right? And the expected profit here is calculated via the premium minus the actuarial costs and a particular administrative cost that is proportional to that. So that gives rise to this upper problem where the premium here is an element of some sets that essentially include the three ideas on the previous slides, right? So on those three premias, we can kind of establish a set flexibly, and those are the three ideas we want to include here for calligraphic PS. But then the farmer, and this is where index insurance plays a role, he has a insurable, or I should say a agricultural loss. Why? But he is not directly indemnifying this, which means purchasing coverage that is directly a function of the loss of the farmer, but instead a non-trivial function of several indices, right? And those indices typically include temperature and precipitation, right? So for particular temperature in a particular region, you can get particular coverages. But we do not impose a lot of structure on this I, because that is what we optimize in our neural networks, but at least we want the coverage to be non-negative. Yes, and the premium is, of course, paid by the farmer, and we study here several choices of a so-called risk measure denoted by rho. For this rho, we have particular expected shortfall type of risk measures in mind. We study several choices for that and see what is the impact on the pricing decisions. So we focus here again on risk measures, both from the perspective of the pricing function as well as on how the farmer evaluates risk. And in particular, and for our convergence proofs, we need those preferences to be convex, to be nice, let's say. We focus on the expected shortfall, also called the conditional value at risk, because it remains to be so-called coherent. And this gives rise to a particular distortion function that can then subsequently be used to determine the underlying risk measure. But we also want to study here a convex combination between the expected losses and the risk measure CVAR that may be due to regulation, and then maximize minimize a weighted sum between the expected losses and a risk measure. And that then gives rise to this convex combination. And then the three sets of PS, calligraphic PS, on the premia include those three. We only focus on an expected value premium, and we only are interested in determining the optimal loading. That is in a way a simple class because it contains only one parameter. And then we're going to add more parameters. In particular, we want to study also nonlinear pricing, making the pricing function convex, and that then gives rise to a second parameter, rho, that captures this convexity. And finally, we also want to determine essentially the entire pricing kernel, so that for every state of the world, you're going to determine the actual price of purchasing coverage in that state of the world. That is then captured by problem set 3. And that is the most complex problem to study. Okay, so that is roughly the idea here. So what is the data we use here? Data from Iowa using the PRISM Calibrate group data. We download the weather data in Iowa, and we study here soybean yields, which are then converted to examples of possible losses for farmers in those regions. So in particular, we focus here on daily minimum, maximum temperatures, precipitation, and some other weather-related indices that we could find. And of course, we checked here those relationships between the actual losses and those 7 variables show nonlinear and complex and non-trivial relationships. And then, I think during the meeting today, we have seen figures like this already a few times. We study several neural networks and study the design of neural networks in a validation exercise. So in a way, these neural networks in this context is not completely new. It has been studied by a paper by Chen and co-authors in 2024 in Management Science, and we essentially apply the same losses. They study corn, we study soybean, but with different preferences. We focus here on risk measures, and of course, we focus on the pricing and the bi-level gain. So on top of neural networks, we also are interested in extending it to convolutional neural networks. Essentially, they roughly see the data or the spatial data more as a picture, and this actually will turn out to work well in the validation. So what is bi-level programming? So generically, what we have in mind here is a problem where we focus the upper problem, minimizing f over x and y under, let's say, the participation of the farmer, right? And then the farmer is the lower problem, which is captured here by y being an s. And here, the use of risk measures actually make the mathematics a little bit harder, because for instance, with expected utility, you can utilize some strict concavity, and that actually helps you determining bounds, etc., for convergence. But here, we do not have a differentiable, or not differentiable everywhere, or strictly convex problem, so we need to do some work that I will actually skip today. So we focus here on the technique to get the lower problem back into the main objective, so that we directly optimize a single objective, that is the problem of the insurer, so the upper problem, plus a penalty times a so-called function value gap penalty, which is the distance between the best decision by the farmer and the actual value function for that particular xy. And if your gamma here is chosen large enough and actually increases, such algorithm can be shown to converge. Okay, let me skip some technical steps of the algorithm, but this is essentially the idea that we show how such bi-level programming objective function with a penalty function works efficiently. Of course, you can argue if you only focus on one parameter decision by the insurer, there is essentially no need for such algorithm, because in a way you can check for every theta what is the best decision. You make a graph, look for the optima. So that is usually still feasible. But of course, this no longer holds true if your data gets very large or if the premia function becomes or contains more parameters. So, okay, we show some examples that this indeed converge. And well, let me skip this. So, and one of our main objectives is also to compare it with actual indemnity insurance. Right? So indemnity insurance is you have directly a function of your Y, of your loss. And if that is feasible, you can actually analytically solve for the optimal insurance contract using some standard techniques nowadays in the literature. Right? So this right figure actually uses our algorithm, but we can also solve it analytically. But the left figure, that is where we need the neural networks, and we get for every state of the world a particular coverage that is obtained as a function of x, not of y. So here the y is the x-axis is the y, right? So it's maybe confusing, but the actual loss is on the x-axis, and the coverage that can only be a function of your indices, not of your x-axis, that is then what is displayed via dot here. So we see we get somewhat close to this stop-loss type structure, and the mismatch essentially give rise to basis risk that we also aim to quantify here in examples. And what we can actually, or what we actually find here is also in index in a monopoly, even though index insurance is less optimal than an indemnity insurance, because indemnity insurance will always do better in terms of having more expected profit by the insurer. So we get, in a way, less profit, but the actual price for index insurance in a monopoly contains a larger loading, a larger price. Right? So the theta here for index insurance is actually larger in the monopoly. It's over 40% as a risk loading on the actuarial value, whereas in the indemnity case, the risk loading is smaller. But again, in the indemnity case, the risk loading is smaller, but the actual expected profit is going to be larger, right? Because in a way, the coverage in general is optimal. And then we study this for various risk measures. So this is the pure risk measure case, and the findings are somewhat intact. So let me go a little bit faster. So what we study, for instance, here is different choices of how much weight does the farmer assign to the risk measure. And we find that if there's a lot of weight to the risk measure, meaning your lambda is closer to 0, so lambda, for instance, of 0.1, that makes the farmer more risk averse, and therefore the actual risk loading determined by the insurer is going to be higher. And consistently, we find that index insurance here actually turns out to be more expensive than indemnity insurance, and we believe this is mainly due to the monopoly structure of the market. Okay, so then we also study here one parameter setting where we already determine the convexity of your pricing, of your prices, and in a way the findings are in a way consistent with before. But we also compare this with the convolutional neural networks, and actually the findings here are nicer in the sense that with convolutional networks, we get closer to the stop loss than with the general neural networks. So in a way, we can kind of game the problem even more, getting even closer to indemnity insurance. Okay, so let me skip this. So then we also do this exercise for the two-parameter case. So here we have a risk loading as well as convexity. We can show analytically the optimal indemnity contract is no longer a stop loss, so a zero coverage and then a slope of 1, but this is so-called limited stop loss, so it has a maximum as well. And we see that this pattern that is optimal for indemnity insurance is somewhat replicated in the index case. Okay, yeah, this was still the old slides. So let me continue. So we also do this for the third problem, which actually numerically is by far the hardest, and that is that we capture here in a way the whole pricing kernel. In a way, this function may be hard to interpret without the details, but the idea here is that the large losses here will be getting a very large price. And in this way, we obtain a figure that actually gets close to the prices that are optimal in an indemnity insurance case, which is exactly going to be the problem that has been studied in the literature with Bowley equilibria. And yeah, our algorithm efficiently captures that. So essentially this table here is what we can solve analytically, and this is what we determine using our algorithm. So I still want to kind of conclude or give an overview of what we roughly do. So we study via validation different networks or convolutional networks. We particularly focus here on a monopoly with particular restrictions. Of course, on the long run, a monopoly may be restrictive, so I heavily suggest to also study the impact of competition, but this is more kind of a first approach to see how one can do that in a monopoly. Okay, and we study a particular bi-level programming approach and validate it using soybean data. Thank you very much.